Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku had rabbit transform Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Inko had to insist with her boss and work late 3 nights in order to take time off to attend the circus. But Izuku had been begging her ever since he'd seen the flyer on a lamppost. He asked so little of her, she wanted to give him this. The circus tickets had been unusually cheap, enough for Inko to easily afford them as a single mother working in retail. Perhaps for that reason, she'd nearly been unable to get a ticket. She'd waited in line for 2 hours and purchased the very last 2 tickets. It had all been worth it to see the sparkle in Izuku's eyes as they approached the giant red and purple circus tent. The flag on the top was pure black and seemed to glow in the twilight. A tune played in the air, not a jaunty circus tune, but rather an ethereal, captivating, and sad violin song. Though Inko looked around, she could not see where the music came from. Could there be hidden speakers? They joined a long line of people. The scarred man with piercings collecting tickets barely seemed to be doing his job. He didn't even look at theirs before waving them in. His coat was ragged. The stitch marks on his face made Inko convinced the marks must be makeup, not real scars. It seemed a tasteless costume to her. The inside of the tent held a giant wooden ring with packed bleachers. Izuku and Inko could barely find 2 seats together, in the back. Shouting to be heard over the crowd, Izuku called, "Thank you for getting the tickets, Mom." She called back, "You had a great idea. This will be fun." Then a gong cut the air, bringing silence. The circus began. The next few hours were dazzling. Inko could barely remember it later. A thick flower scent filled the air, choking her and making her dizzy. She retained flashes of the performance. A blonde girl with buns had spun on the trapeze above a pit of fire. There had been a heavily made-up clown with red eyes who decayed his juggling ball. Someone with lizard scales had swallowed swords. A man in a magician's hat had thrown knives at a masked man. At one point, the knife went clean through his heart. Inko's own heart had nearly stopped. But then a second version of the man had stepped out from behind the board, completely unharmed. Of course it had all been part of the act. Inko had applauded intensely with the rest of the audience. The special effects in this show were amazing. A man dressed in all black swept onto the stage, the Ringmaster, who had introduced himself as All for One. He called, "For my magic show, I require an assistant." Izuku leapt to his feet, waving. Me! Inko prayed for her son to be selected. She'd been working late a lot, and Izuku had been picking up more of the cooking and cleaning at home. She felt guilty for not being able to provide him with a better life. He deserved to have this happy moment. All for One's gaze swept the crowd. His fingers settled on Izuku. "You with those marvelous eyes. Ah, what a cute little bunny. Hop down to the stage." "Me?" Izuku gasped. His smile was brilliant. Later that smile would be seared into Inko's memory. At the time, she only pushed his back and said playfully, "Go on." As Izuku headed down the stairs, Inko held up her phone. She would record every moment of her son's performance. All for One swept open his cape, and a wooden chair appeared. "Please sit down, my assistant." Izuku sat, squirming. His eyes sparked with excitement. "Look at your nose wrinkled up. You look like a little bunny." All for One addressed the audience. "Shall we turn the bunny into a real bunny?" "Yes," they roared. All for One swept his cape over Izuku. The scent of flowers in the air intensified. When All for One pulled back his arm, a tiny cute bunny perched on the chair. The audience screamed and clapped. Inko applauded too, impressed. All for One quickly scooped up the bunny and handed it to the blonde girl. Then he moved on to a card trick. As the show continued, Inko wondered when Izuku would return. Perhaps the circus staff were keeping him behind the stage to avoid ruining the illusion that he'd been transformed. She hoped that at least they let him sit somewhere where he could see the rest of the magic show. He'd been looking forward to it so much. When the show ended, Inko looked around. "Where's my son?" The man sitting next to her said, "Ma'am, you've been alone this entire performance." Inko glared. "That's impossible. My son came with me. You saw him pretend to turn into a bunny." "You mean the magician's assistant?" "No, my son." Inko took out her phone to show the video of Izuku going down the stairs to the stage. But she couldn't find the video. All her pictures of the circus were gone. She decided not to waste any time arguing with a stranger. She went to find the circus staff. But the scar-faced attendant told her with a smirk that no volunteers had been used in the show. He even had the nerve to tell her that she'd come alone, even though he'd watched her and Izuku enter. In the end, Inko had to be dragged screaming out of the circus and thrown out. The Ringmaster led Izuku from tent to tent, opening the flap with a flourish to show off another exhibit, another trick as Izuku politely applauded. It had been fun at first, when All for One had offered to let Izuku stay late at the circus to make up for him missing out on part of the show while backstage. But now? It was a little too real. Invisible whispers teased his ears, and muffled roars sounded from a distance. Shadows from the tents rippled and stretched, seeming to follow after Izuku's own hunched form. Most of the audience had disappeared, even the most stubborn straggler was nowhere to be seen. And the circus workers who had seemed so happy and bright under the gaudy ring lights now looked wrong. Their painted faces appeared stretched on, ill-fitting masks that sagged with every toothy smile. Their bodies hunched, bulging out in strange places. Izuku tried to console himself. It was the shadows cast from dimly shining lights, playing tricks in his head, like how the Ringmaster played with his head. That was what made magic fun. It looked real, sometimes it even felt real, but it wasn't. At the end of the night, when the show was over, the magic was put away. Handkerchiefs folded into neat squares, trapdoors closed for the day, and top hats placed on their stand. Magic was fun because it looked real, but this magic was looking a little too real. "Are you enjoying the tour?" the Ringmaster asked, leaning down towards Izuku, his mouth pulled in a sharp grin. Were his teeth always that pointed? Izuku looked away and noted, to his discomfort, how the sun had set, the stars peeking out. Mom would be looking for him. She was probably already talking to all of the employees, asking after him. If he didn't get back soon she might freak out and call the police. That might not be a bad thing. "Yes," Izuku finally said. "It's been so nice of you to take this extra time for me." The Ringmaster's smile widened, stretching up to his eyes. Izuku fought back a shudder. "But I feel bad for imposing on you. It's getting late, and you have more important things to do, and I should really be getting back. Mom will be worried." He tried to make a bad joke to ease his nervousness and sensed that something was wrong. "She might even think you turned me into a real rabbit. Now that's a fun idea. I need a replacement." Toga got overly excited and ate the previous rabbit. A hand landed on Izuku's shoulder, and he jumped. "There's no need to go, Bunny," the Ringmaster said, leaning closer. "In fact, the show's just begun." Ate the rabbit? Had that been a joke? A tingling ran down Izuku's spine when the Ringmaster's hand touched his shoulder, and it uncomfortably reminded him of those silly shivers he'd get sometimes when he was watching scary movies. The hand that seemed like an iron clamp fell away suddenly, red eyes peering down at Izuku with a strange intensity, searching, waiting for something to happen. Izuku needed to leave. He needed to leave now. Thank you for the tour, really, but my mom's waiting for me. I should go." Izuku stuttered out. "Oh?" the Ringmaster said, amusement leaking from his tone. "Why don't you stay a while longer, Izuku? There's so much else for you to see." His giant hand reached out for Izuku. Seeing the arm once more moving towards him, Izuku panicked and stumbled away from the Ringmaster. "Run!" his instinct screamed, and Izuku eagerly obeyed. Weaving in between the tents, his panicked mind could barely pick up on the oddities in the darkness, but pick up on them he did. Sprinting through the maze of the circus, he saw no one. The show only ended less than an hour ago, so where was everyone else? And the performers that blurred past seemed even more grotesque and misshapen, beyond what would normally be blamed on shadows. Izuku's heart raced as reality began to morph around him. Tents bent and grew, the performers were ballooning and swelling, becoming hideous monsters, and the ground was shifting and rolling like the ocean, making Izuku stumble and falter in his mad dash to safety. But suddenly Izuku was toppling to the ground, falling head over heels in the shifting lawn. When he rolled to a stop he was immediately trying to stand up to flee, but his legs gave out beneath him. Oh, God, his legs. Izuku couldn't feel his legs. "Tut tut, little bunny," came the horrifying voice of the Ringmaster behind him. "You shouldn't have tried to run." Izuku's heart flip-flopped as he spun from his seat on the ground. His head turned slowly, not wanting to face the horror behind him creeping up on his fallen form. But Izuku did turn, and his heart stopped. The Ringmaster, a charming man with curly white hair and gleaming red eyes, was gone. In his place, a monster stood. At least 7 feet tall, the creature had no eyes or nose, only a mouth full of sharp teeth that gleamed from his too wide mouth. Scar tissue rippled and webbed across his face, pointed ears jutted from the side of the creature's head and sharp, black claws tipped his fingers. A long, red tail twitched and whipped at the creature's ankles, only just missing the tips of the giant wings upon its back. Izuku could only stare in horror as the monster stepped closer. "So young, and cute," the creature said, claws delicately cupping Izuku's chin and forcing his gaze upward. "Such a shame you found your way here, tonight." The creature paused a moment, tilting its head in thought before continuing. "Well, a shame for you. I, for one, am rather excited to have a new little bunny to help with my tricks. Another pause as a malicious grin split the monster's face. It's been far too long since I've had a pet in my show. Then, the claws cupping Izuku's face were no longer gentle. Instead, they moved to Izuku's chest where they pierced the skin above his heart. And it burned. The claws felt as though they were dipped in acid, dripping into his veins and spreading the painful sensation along Izuku's entire body. His muscles spasmed, body writhing uncontrollably under the influence of whatever the monster had done. Outside of the pain, what Izuku could feel happening in his body made him want to throw up. His skin felt way too tight on his frame, pulling tortuously with every shift of his limbs, and it itched, too, like a rash he couldn't scratch. Bones cracked and shifted under his skin, and with that Izuku really did throw up, the sickening sensation too much for his mind. Izuku's teeth fell out next, too big for his mouth now. Everything was too big and too small at once, and tears fell unbidden down Izuku's cheeks from the pain and confusion of it all. It ended, blessedly, the pain ended and Izuku was left panting on the grassy lawn. He squeaked when hands that had hurt but were now gentle picked him up and tucked Izuku into a massive chest. Izuku was so tired he didn't even notice what he'd become. But the Ringmaster saw and was delighted by the transformation. So cute. All for one cooed, a single finger petting the ears of the exhausted bunny in his embrace. The boy bunny now only trembled in the Fae's grip, unable to comprehend what was happening around him. His fur felt soft to the touch, and with All for One's magic he could see how big and bright the little bunny's eyes were, and the cute little pink nose that twitched with the new variety of smells. Izuku had been such a cute little human, but All for One thought he made a much better bunny. Yes, I think I'm glad I didn't eat you, little Izuku, he whispered to the little thing in his embrace. You're too adorable to waste those looks and far too intelligent to make into one of my Nomu. You'll make a fine addition to my act, so good for luring in other humans. All for One pulled Izuku to his face as he nuzzled the bunny, enjoying the feeling of the silky fur on his scarred skin. Yes, I don't think I'll ever let you go, Izuku. You're mine now. Izuku hopped around the tent, highly aware of the monster that sat at the desk nearby. It had been a few days since he'd been captured and transformed into a bunny, and boy hadn't that been wild once he had recovered enough to realize. The Ringmaster had yet to let him out of He had clearly proved himself not to be human sight. Izuku had been looking for a chance to sneakily hop away, hoping his new tiny size would allow him to escape unnoticed. He so desperately wanted to get back to his mother, but the Ringmaster had kept him trapped inside his tent, allowing Izuku out when he was around, and keeping him locked in a cage when he wasn't. Now that Izuku was aware of the true nature of the circus, All for One didn't bother to keep anything hidden, and oftentimes Izuku's new, sensitive bunny ears would pick up pained groans and horrifying screams from throughout the circus. He didn't want to know what was happening to anyone else out there. Clearly All for One considered him special, but Izuku wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Come here, baby bunny, cooed the devil himself, and Izuku scurried away, heading for the relative safety of the space beneath the creature's bed. He didn't make it before long arms scooped him up, holding him securely to prevent him from jumping free from their grip. Izuku was carried over and set down on the desk in front of the creature, his ears lowered at the sight of that mutilated face. There was something about the Ringmaster's smile that set off some new instinct inside of him, told him to run, that a predator was nearby. Perhaps it was the fact that his mouth was the only thing left on his face, taking up more room than a mouth should. Perhaps it was the sharp teeth, or the wickedness that played along the line of his lips. Whatever it was, it made Izuku a bit sick to look at. Naughty little bunny you are, All for One scolded playfully, fingers running through Izuku's soft fur. I'm going to be putting on another show soon, and I plan for you to have a starring role. So, we need to go over the rules you'll be following. Hating the feeling of those large fingers stroking over his frame, Izuku nipped at the closest appendage, just barely missing. The fingers dug into the scruff of his neck, holding him warningly. Number 1, play nice. The bunny held still, frightened by the grin. I want everyone to see what a sweet helper I have. I know they'll be drawn to you just as I was. Izuku shuddered at that. How had he not noticed from the very beginning? Looking back, it had been unusual for him to be chosen out of the crowd from his spot in the back. Even stranger that after the show the Ringmaster himself had reached out to him in order to show him around. Now it was too late to do anything. The second rule is to be still until the big reveal. He snapped his fingers, the fancy top hat he had worn during the show appearing on the desk. I keep a lot of my special things in here. Some of them would be intrigued if they found you tucked in there too. He resumed stroking the silky fur in faux reassurance. You've seen my other creatures, do you remember? Even now, a scream echoed from somewhere on the tent grounds, a victim of one of All for One's monsters. Yes, Izuku recalled them very well. As long as you can stay quiet in the dark, my little bunny will be just fine. The grin sharpened to something mean, and Izuku instinctively scrambled for the edge of the table before the hands caught him tight. Ah, and that brings up my most important rule. Number 3, Izuku, he held the shaking bunny a little too close to the teeth, the scars. I know you will be tempted to see how far you can run, once you're out of the safety of this tent. But I promise, things will be much, much worse if you leave me. Izuku made a small squeak of protest, shaking as the man chuckled. So stay close, little Izuku. And do not attempt to escape. There was some noise at the entrance, and All for One looked up, his grin relaxing into something satisfied. Ah, Tamura. Thank you for coming. There's someone I'd like to introduce you to. The person who entered looked almost human, a young man, at least until he stepped into the light. There was something wrong about his skin, waxy and falling apart, like there were multiple layers to his skin, constantly in the state of peeling. Izuku felt like scurrying back as he looked down on him. Tamura, All for One had called him, and he gazed at Izuku with something between curiosity and hostility. The constant failing of his skin made it difficult to make out. What is that? The voice was wrong as well. It sounded almost painful, like his vocal cords had been ripped apart and then sewn together wrong, and Izuku would have felt pity or worry if he wasn't well aware that this was someone the Ringmaster deemed important enough for him to be introduced to. Not that Izuku wanted to be introduced to every monster that the Ringmaster kept. The noises were bad enough. This is my newest little assistant. The Ringmaster lifted Izuku up, uncaring of the way that Izuku squirmed in his grasp, the fingers and joints on the man's hands longer than they should be and able to easily hold Izuku firm no matter how much he struggled. Say hello to Izuku. Tamura stepped closer, and was reaching out to take him as All for One was offering. Izuku desperately didn't want Tamura to hold him, he didn't want All for One to hold him in the first place, didn't want either of them to be touching him. His heartbeat was racing in his small chest, almost vibrating, and in the indecision to flee, to run, the warning ringing in his head. Izuku froze. He couldn't move. Careful now, All for One warned as Tamura gripped him and shifted his hold until Izuku was held with both his hands. He's quite unused to his new position and form, just as you once were. And if Izuku hadn't been frightened enough, the implication of that sent his racing heart skipping and stuttering. He's soft. Tamura murmured begrudgingly, his hands gripping Izuku much tighter than All for One had. While Izuku could almost be engulfed by the Ringmaster's hands, Tamura's were smaller but no less unpleasant to be in. Still, Izuku's instincts urged him to sit still. His mind's eye picturing the cold hands he was in to be similar to a mouse trap. One wrong move and the grip that already dug into his ribs might crack them instead. I'm glad you find him so delightful, the faceless monster said, his grin stretching as he watched Tamura handling the tiny creature. Izuku flinched slightly as Tamura stroked over his ears. The bunny's little nose twitched a mile a minute on instinct. He almost wanted to GG at the strong smell of iron and rot clinging to Tamura's hands. He hoped it wouldn't be left lingering on his fur. The younger man scowled at All for One's amused tone. Suddenly he moved to grip Izuku by the scruff, causing Izuku to squeak out in surprise and fear as he was lifted to face the scraggly-haired man. And Izuku's heart nearly stopped as he came face to face with the other. The way his skin peeled around his eyes and mouth made him seem like a rotting corpse. His red eyes glowed at the small rabbit, looking him over as if he was trying to figure out if Izuku was a pet or something to slaughter. Either way, Izuku found himself quite finished with being manhandled. Izuku fidgeted and then wriggled. Being suspended far from the ground was scary, but this person was far more frightening. He wanted down. Careful. All for One said, the voice just behind Izuku himself only serving to stress him out further. Large hands cupped under Izuku's hind legs and a new hand replaced Tamura's as Izuku was transferred back into All for One's hands. If he kicks out while you hold him like that, he will break his own back. Izuku paused with this new knowledge. Could rabbits do that? Who cares? You could just fix him. Tamura said coldly with a shrug. Izuku stared at him in horror. All for One chuckled. While that is true, I don't want him to break just yet. Izuku's heart felt like it could burst out of his small chest. The Ringmaster doesn't want Izuku to break yet? What did he mean by that? Transforming into a bunny was already the worst pain Izuku had ever felt, and he didn't want to be hurt like that again. Without realizing it, Izuku began to let out small squeaks like he was trying to speak. All for One had noticed his mumbling habit when he was still human, but to see it transfer to this small form was very endearing. Why is he squeaking? At Tamura's words the sound stopped and Izuku tensed even further in his grip. It seemed as though Izuku didn't realize what he was doing. Just a small habit from when he was a human. Anyways, I asked you to come here to help me run little Izuku through the acts he will be in during our next show. Izuku shivered. He no longer trusted the creature's magic, but the Ringmaster merely chuckled. "Don't worry, my little bunny, we'll keep it simple this first time. A simple magic trick, pulling a rabbit out of a hat." With a flourish, he grabbed his shimmering top hat, running a finger across the rim. "Here's the hat," he said, chuckling. "And you're the rabbit." Izuku squeaked, squirming as All for One positioned the hat under his feet. It was like dangling over the edge of a cliff, knowing that any slip would lead to certain death. His stomach rolled, his hind legs kicking out for solid ground. The hat's insides extended unnaturally, he could see no bottom but a long, deep hole. The darkness inside was alive, twisting up, reaching for Izuku. A chill misted up from it, and Izuku could hear muffled echoes resonating. Shivering, he turned pleading eyes to the Ringmaster. He didn't want this. He really didn't want this. He had already been ripped from his happy life, forced into a different form to serve as a monster's pet. But he could live with all of that, as long as he didn't have to go into that hat. The Ringmaster's mouth curled. Izuku. What was rule number 2? Be still. And with that, he lowered Izuku into the hat. Down, down, down. The depths of the darkness seemed unending, and the light from the hat opening was quickly lost in Izuku's spiral downwards. He landed with an oof on strange-feeling ground. Squishy. Giving way but also remaining firm like flesh. Disoriented and frightened, Izuku immediately took a few hops, trying to find any spot to stand that wasn't like this. Yet every step remained the same. His sensitive large ears twitched at a sound, causing Izuku to freeze. And then he recalled that All for One had said not to move while in the hat. A rule he had already disobeyed in the mere seconds he had been here. He sat up on his hind legs, ears turning to try and locate the threat. Yet the more he listened the more he became confused. Because the sound came from everywhere. Even with his better hearing though Izuku couldn't make out exactly what it was. An occasional growl, grunts, even whispering. Sobs, and quiet breathing. He was not alone in this complete darkness. Were there more people like him in here somewhere? Or were they like the grotesque monsters the Ringmaster had masquerading around the circus tent? Tamura had once been like him, so even if there were other victims that was no guarantee he'd be safe near them. What should he do? Was there an exit somewhere else within this place? Was this just a bigger cage? He sat in indecision for another moment when a much louder step sounded off to the side of him. Izuku's tiny form turned to stare at the dark. Steps, stumbling, approaching. And the sound of sniffing, like a starved dog. Whatever was coming to seek him out, it wasn't something he wanted to be found by. Izuku bolted away from it. Even if he was blind, his ears helped him in the dark. He zigzagged, avoiding anything that sounded remotely close to him. There had to be an exit somewhere. Otherwise he was lost in the hat. Would All for One even be able to find him now that he'd moved? Was that a light he saw in the distance? Izuku dashed toward the light hoping and praying that it was the exit. While his sensitive ears did pick up some noise in that direction, it was probably just Tamura and the Ringmaster. As Izuku ran, the light got bigger and brighter. This had to be the exit, the opening in the top hat. His speed increased as he sprinted to leave this area filled with nightmares, only to run face first into something hard and bounce backwards a small ways on the fleshy ground. Looking towards the light, disoriented after his collision, Izuku noticed that instead of the light coming out from a doorway, it was floating in the darkness. It reminded him of a fish in an old movie that used light to attract prey. His ears twitched and he heard a low growl that started to reverberate in his chest. No. Just like the fish from that movie, he'd fallen straight into the trap. Now that he realized the trick, Izuku could see bits of the creature that had been revealed by the light. The massive beast loomed above him. Drool slowly dripped off its fangs that glistened in the light from a bulb hanging above its forehead. Its skin was like tar. Its eyes were darker than the abyss they were in. The creature had jagged claws that seemed made for ripping through flesh, and they were heading right for him. Izuku turned and jumped away as fast as his legs would allow, but in his haste to get away, he failed to remember there were other creatures sitting in the dark. He kept running, but now every turn he made had another monster to run into. Soon enough he was surrounded. They were going to kill him, weren't they? If he had listened to All for One, would he be in this situation? Why didn't he just stay still? Now he was going to die as a rabbit in a pit filled with monsters. He could feel their hot breath on his fur and squeaked in terror. This was it. Izuku tried to brace himself for the pain of being torn to shreds and eaten when. There you are, brat. Tamura's raspy voice came out of nowhere and Izuku couldn't have been more relieved. He must know how to deal with these creatures. He could save Izuku. He had been here much longer and survived, right? Tamura could scare the monsters away. Suddenly a loud whining whimpering sound was heard and the creature with the light collapsed onto the squishy ground. Izuku's ears picked up movement from around him and he realized the other monsters must be leaving. Sighing in relief, Izuku looked up at his savior from the fading light only to freeze once more. Tamura's red eyes flashed as he glared down at him. The flesh practically falling off his face made his sneer even more pronounced, and the shadows cast by the light made him appear increasingly sinister. Didn't Sensei tell you to stay still? Even if Tamura wasn't someone who Izuku felt safe with, he ran towards him. The lanky man offered a refuge from the unseen monsters in the dark. Izuku felt better with a monster he knew rather than whatever was lurking out here. Perhaps Izuku should have wondered why the monsters in the dark feared the one in front of him. The small rabbit settled at Tamura's feet, resting his forepaws on his legs in almost a begging way to be picked up. Tamura glared down at him, and for a moment Izuku feared he would be kicked away. Luckily the older boy just clicked his tongue and bent to scoop him up. Izuku shivered as he realized Tamura's hands were wet. The previous scent of blood Izuku had detected on him back in the tent was now overwhelming. And now the blood was soaking into Izuku's fur. You're pathetic. Why did Sensei even take you? Tamura sneered. Yet despite his harsh words his hands were smearing blood over Izuku's shaking form. Petting him. Enjoying Izuku's softness. Izuku burrowed into Tamura's chest, uncaring and only wanting to leave this place. Surely, Tamura knew the way out. The light from the creature that had originally drawn Izuku in was starting to fade. Izuku glanced down at it, realizing Tamura had killed it. They would soon be plunged back into darkness. He looked up to see if he could spot if anything was useful. But the little light left gave him no comfort. Because out in the dark, there reflected eyes in the dying light. Eyes everywhere. The creatures hadn't left, they were just waiting and watching from a distance. When he looked back at Tamura, he squeaked. Because in the shadows behind Tamura, a giant hand was descending upon them. Though Tamura seemed unconcerned about it. Tamura didn't even react with the hand clamped around them both. Izuku squirmed in fear, squeaking constantly until Tamura squeezed him with a scowl. Be quiet. You're giving me a headache, Tamura growled, keeping Izuku crushed to his chest to avoid losing the rabbit as they were pulled through the darkness. And then suddenly they emerged into light. Izuku shut his eyes immediately. The light feeling blinding after being in such complete darkness. And the sound. Inside the hat had been quiet and Izuku had had to strain to hear the monsters. Now the carnival of despair around him blared in his sensitive ears. All the agony outside the tent was far more noticeable. Ah, you found him. All for one said, sounding pleased. The Ringmaster stood beside Tamura, withdrawing his hand from the other. The ominous top hat was set down on the desk nearby. Your stupid rabbit was running around teasing the Nomu, practically asking to be ripped apart, Tamura said, turning to face All for One. Izuku still held tightly. He just needs training. Practice makes perfect. All for One said, shrugging before reaching out and plucking the shivering bunny from Tamura's arms. I'm disappointed, Izuku. You kept me waiting for an hour. Perhaps I should keep your cage in there until you learn to remain still, the eyeless monster tooted. If Izuku had the ability to cry he would be sobbing at the thought of such a thing. An hour? He couldn't have been in the hat for more than a few minutes, and that was far more than he would have desired. Was time as warped in there as the creatures that roamed it? Was that all you needed, Sensei? Tamura asked, itching at his skin. Izuku watched in disgust as some of it peeled away under his careless touch. Yes. For now. Thank you for assisting our lost little bunny. All for One said, holding Izuku in one arm and stroking a finger between his ears in a faux sense of comfort after having just threatened him. The other boy grunted and left the tent, leaving them alone once more. Did you learn that the rules I've told you about have been for your own good? All for One asked smugly as he continued to pet the rabbit. He paused and pulled away his hand to stare at the red that was brushed from Izuku's fur. I suppose a bath is in order. Can't have you looking unpresentable for our guests, can we? Izuku sat still as All for One brushed through his fur. He had struggled at first until he decided that being touched was much better than feeling so gross. Bath time was quick, but the drying and brushing that came after lasted much longer. Had he been human, he would have sat through the ordeal while sniffling back tears. As a bunny, he just made a sad squeak every now and then, keeping his ears low to his back. Have you learned your lesson? All for One asked, setting the brush aside to pet Izuku with his hands instead. Izuku hunched down and flattened his ears even more. He felt so small and weak and stupid. He wanted to run away, but he was starting to think that he would never get home. The world was a dangerous place for such a small bunny, but the circus was even more dangerous. And more dangerous than anything out there was the man running his fingers over his ears and back. You'll be a good little assistant from now on, won't you? All for One tipped Izuku's head up to look at him. Izuku shrank back submissively, his little nose twitching. The creature smiled at him and cupped his hands around him to pick him up. No need to be nervous, bunny. As long as you're good you have nothing to worry about. He picked Izuku up and looked him over. Much better. You're nice and clean now and as adorable as ever. Izuku continued to sit still as the monster pulled him in close to his chest to cuddle him, stroking and massaging his freshly dried and brushed fur. He wasn't sure if it was the fear or the helplessness that kept him in place. Today had been too much for his tiny heart and body to handle. Maybe tomorrow he would fight back again, but today he was tired and clean and his eyes were taking longer and longer to open each time he closed them. Even as he drifted off to sleep in his captor's arms, he couldn't shake the feeling that a new day would bring new horrors. Things only could get worse from here. Izuku awoke into a pit of darkness. Why was he here? Why wasn't he in his cage or the Ringmaster's arms? While trying to figure out where he was, Izuku started putting more pressure on his feet to hop forward and the ground moved a little. It was squishy, like the ground in All for One's hat. All at once Izuku became a statue. No moving, no breathing, not even twitching his ears to hear what monsters might be around him. The second rule is to be still. All for One's voice seemed to echo to Izuku in the darkness. If he's still, he's safe. If he's still, he's safe. If he's still, he's safe. The mantra replayed over and over in his head. Nothing can hurt him if he stays still. That's why the rule was there after all, to keep Izuku safe. Why did the Ringmaster put him back in here? Did he do something wrong? No, maybe he just wanted Izuku to have more practice for the circus act? That was probably the most likely reason. Lost in thought, Izuku jolted when he felt something large encase his small form and he started to squirm. No. He was supposed to be safe. The Ringmaster told him that he wouldn't get hurt if he didn't move. He did everything right, so why was this thing picking him up? He squirmed around fruitlessly trying to get out of the grip that was holding him, but nothing was working. Just as he was about to sink his teeth into the thing that was trapping him, he was blinded by light. When his eyes adjusted, he realized the thing holding him was the Ringmaster's hand, which had just finished pulling him out of the hat. Looking between the hat and his captor, Izuku's eyes welled up with tears and he began to squeak rapidly at All for One, trying to ask questions. The eyeless monster just stared back at Izuku with a wide smile splitting his face. When Izuku's squeaking and cries died down, All for One spoke. That was much better, Bunny. I thought a little more practice before our show tonight would be beneficial, and I was right. You'll perform perfectly this evening. This evening? That was too fast. He'd only been with the circus for 2 weeks, he couldn't be ready for a real performance. Even if he was, Izuku didn't want to be in the show. He knew that as awful as his treatment had been, others had much worse fates, and he didn't want to help this evil creature pull new people into his trap. Maybe Izuku could help the people that came to the circus. Yes, he could do that. He wasn't sure how he would pull it off, but even if it's just one person, Izuku felt determined to help them escape. Hold nice and still now, Izuku, All for One said as he wrapped the large ribbon around Izuku's neck. Izuku stood still as a stuffed rabbit, terrified of what the man might do if he tried to struggle. Would he pull the ribbon tight and strangle him? Break his legs and throw him to the monsters? His tiny body shivered as his captor tied the cream ribbon into a large bow behind his head. There, very cute. The hands pulled back from his neck, settling instead on his head to slide his ears back. They'll love you, Bunny. I think you'll make my best assistant yet. Are you almost ready, Sensei? Tamura asked as he ducked into the tent again. I'm afraid I was distracted getting little Izuku ready. All for One admitted. He scooped Izuku up and walked over to the younger man. Tamura looked different, covered in a glamour that concealed his flaking skin. He was wearing bright colors and bells that strangely didn't ring when he walked. He scowled as soon as he saw Izuku, but didn't protest when All for One placed the bunny in his hands. Hold him for me while I finish up. I don't want him getting dirty. Tamura grumbled but pulled Izuku's small form into his chest. Izuku shivered, anxious about having Tamura hold him. Tamura didn't seem to like him, but at the same time he refused to stop petting him. He kept digging his smelly fingers into Izuku's fur, rubbing into his softness, flattening his ears down, hugging his small frame. It wasn't long before All for One was finished with his own glamour. He looked the same as Izuku remembered from his first night at the circus, otherworldly, handsome, and with an aura about him that drew everyone's attention. He chuckled when he saw the way that Tamura was cuddling Izuku. You certainly like it when Tamura pets you, he told Izuku. The bunny gave a small squeak of indignation. He did not like Tamura touching him at all. But Rule 1 was to play nice and Rule 2 was to hold still. And he was scared too, scared of what might happen if he tried to run or even got dirty before the performance. All for One held his hands out and Tamura, somewhat reluctantly, gave Izuku back. All for One smoothed down his ruffled fur, stroking the space between his ears a few times. Ready to go, bunny? Izuku looked up at him, nose twitching. He was scared, of course, but there was nothing he could do. All for One smiled wide enough that it nearly cracked his glamour. He took off his hat and began lowering Izuku inside. In you go, baby. Just remember the rules and everything will be just fine. The now familiar darkness encased Izuku. The quiet of the hat dimension was always scary, like the hesitant moments that happened before disaster. Just as Izuku tucked himself into a ball to wait out the time until the Ringmaster grabbed him again, a hand grasped him. He squeaked in surprise, but the large hand of the Ringmaster was terribly familiar and he quickly settled. Time was so strange in the hat. He could never tell how long it would feel. He was just thankful that this time it had only been a minute. Izuku closed his eyes knowing that he would be blinded on his exit. After practicing so many times it was now something he expected. He was pulled from the hat in flourish. The warmth of the natural world let Izuku know he was clear from the hat and he was immediately bombarded by sounds. All for One held him aloft by his scruff. The audience clapped and exclaimed in excitement. Izuku finally blinked open his eyes, the transition from dark to light easier this way. Vibrant colors dazzled Izuku's vision from every place in the big top tent. So much to see happening around him. The Ringmaster stood in the middle of it all, showing Izuku off to the crowds that surrounded the ring. Music in whimsical chimes and chest-rumbling drums assaulted him along with the smell of sweets tinting the air. Izuku remembered seeing this show from the audience's perspective. It had seemed magical. Izuku now knew it really was, unfortunately for the people sitting and enjoying the show. Isn't he cute? All for One asked them, pulling Izuku close to his glamoured face as he placed his hat back on his head. He's a great little assistant. Why don't you take a bow, my bunny? And suddenly with a snap, glittering pink smoke encased Izuku, and he accidentally breathed it in. He coughed, reaching to rub at his throat and then freezing as he realized he could do such a thing. He stared down at his human hand. And then down at the little suit he wore, a matching set to the Ringmaster's own, only with green accents instead of red. The crowd gasped in surprise, then cheered and clapped at Izuku's appearance. Izuku looked up, completely in shock at the situation and the sudden change back to his human body. Before his mind could really wrap around it, All for One's hand settled on his head, making ice run through his veins. He was gently led to bend in a bow before the people. Don't be fooled though. He is still my bunny even when he pretends to be human. All for One announced. The hand on his head lifted, and following the hand a large pair of bunny ears sprouted from Izuku's head. The crowd laughed at Izuku's startled jump. The manipulation of his body with magic felt so odd and hurt a little. Izuku froze once more when mixed in with the laughter was giggling. High-pitched. Childish. Wide green eyes blinked and focused past the bright lights that blared down on him. The crowd was more or less just shadowy figures in front of him. But when he looked he could spot children among them. Kids. Younger than even him. Izuku's mounting horror made his vision swim. Tears threatening to spill. He knew what fate potentially waited for all these people. He couldn't let that happen. Not if he could warn them to run now. Izuku opened his mouth to shout at them but found himself snatched off his feet. Strong arms crushed him into the chest of the evil fae who ruled this carnival. A hand went over Izuku's mouth and a whisper glided over his twitching bunny ears. Bunnies don't speak. All for One said just to him, making Izuku shiver before the glittering smoke came back. He was once again a tiny rabbit in the arms of the ringleader. We can't share our magical secrets, bunny. All for One said aloud to the audience. Secrets like this one. All for One tipped his top hat to the audience before grabbing his cape and bringing it up in a consuming swish. When the cape fell away, where the Ringmaster stood was left empty to the astonishment of the crowd, the space quickly filled by other performers as the show reached its finale and the chaos of the ring reached a crescendo. To the small rabbit, the cape fell away and suddenly they were standing in the shadows, off to the side of the ring. All for One easily blended with the shadows, even though the mesmerized crowd probably would have never noticed him walking behind the stands to the entrance. Izuku didn't realize he was shaking until All for One's hand smoothed over him. You were a good bunny. Although, in the future I expect you to be quiet. I'd hate to clip your vocal cords. Your squeaks are too cute to ruin like that. All for One hummed both to Izuku and to himself. Izuku shrunk at just the thought of what would have happened to him had he been able to shout at the crowd. But the other kids. They came to the entrance of the tent and All for One stood to the side waiting. Not long after, the music broke in the tent and the crowd clapped a final applause. Izuku noticed how barren it looked outside the tent. Everyone who attended the carnival must be in there. The crowd started to come out and All for One stood smiling with too many teeth for Izuku's liking. And then the patter of many small feet came running. Suddenly the looming tall Ringmaster was surrounded by small children. Izuku flinched in surprise and horror as they all cooed at Izuku. Many crowing, asking to pet him. All for One chuckled down at the small crowd around him, keeping Izuku just out of reach from any stray little hands. Look at this bunny, everyone wants you. All for One said, arching an eyebrow at all the pleading children. Right this way, children. Let's not block the exit. All for One moved away from the main tent with the children eagerly following. All for One turned away from them and headed through the many stalls of the carnival. Izuku could do nothing but sit in the creature's arms staring up at the smile that spilt All for One's face in a horrific way. The glamour was falling away. The Fae was taking them to a tent in a deserted corner of the carnival. He couldn't let whatever was about to happen. Izuku started to struggle. A squeak was forced out of him when the Fae's large hand closed tight around him with a bear trap, digging into his flesh and bones. It continued crushing him until Izuku couldn't breathe. All for One didn't let up even after Izuku stopped struggling, not until they entered the empty tent with the children all following in after him. Izuku took in a breath finally, having nearly blacked out. He stared out at eager faces as the children thought they would be getting to play with him. Would you kids like to see one more trick? I'll show you something magical. All for One asked, drawing the attention of the children away from the struggling rabbit. A chorus of approval rang out in the tent, making All for One smile widen. The sight of such a thing had a few of the children's own smiles dampening. Clearly sensing something off. Very well. All for One once again took off his top hat. I'll put the bunny in here. And I'll pull out something even better. All for One exclaimed. Izuku couldn't even protest as he was once more plucked up and hovered over the hat. A few children pouted at watching Izuku and knowing he would disappear. But most sat watching curiously and with wonder. Izuku could only stare powerlessly as he was lowered into the hat. His last image was one of a tent full of innocent children. All for One dropped him in darkness. And grabbed something else. The screams of the children followed Izuku as he fell back into the dark's embrace. Izuku sank his teeth into the hand as soon as it had lifted him from the hat. He was so hurt and afraid and angry he didn't care what consequences he received. Play nice, Izuku. All for One warned. Otherwise I might change my mind about your reward for being so good during your performance today. Can I hold him? Tamura asked, sounding a little too eager. You did well today too, I suppose. All for One handed the squirming bunny to Tamura. Maybe you can get him to calm down, since he likes you so much. Tamura quickly pulled Izuku to his chest, digging his dirty fingers into Izuku's fur. Izuku kept squirming and kicking. He hated Tamura. He hated being a bunny. He hated All for One. He hated this circus. He hated how they were using him. Tamura held him tighter and tighter until at last, he was forced to stop struggling. Instead, he resigned to making sad, soft squeaks. He wanted to cry. It's time for you to check on the Nomus again. All for One said at last. His glamour was gone, making him appear as the frightening, half-faced monster once more. Tamura was reluctant to hand Izuku back, petting him over and over with firm, forceful strokes. He even nuzzled his nose into Izuku's back to feel his softness against his dry, peeling face. Finally, Izuku was transferred back into All for One's massive hands. You can hold him again later, All for One promised, which seemed to cheer Tamura up some, and he hurried to complete his duties so he could return. As for you, my cute little assistant, are you ready for your reward? All for One's fingers had begun petting him in Tamura's place. Izuku shivered. He just wanted to go to bed. The day had been exhausting and he didn't trust anything the Ringmaster could give him. Don't be so sad, bunny. All for One's fingers made their way under his head to keep him from hiding. You were the star of the show. Everyone adored you. Izuku just squeaked again, sad and tired. He didn't want them to love him. If they loved him, All for One used him to trick them and hurt them. I'm sure my surprise will cheer you up. Without any more warning, All for One tossed Izuku up in the air. Izuku shrieked and flailed, even when he landed safely in the man's arms again. He grabbed onto his shirt, shaking head to toe. Wait. Toes? Izuku blinked several times. He was human again, just like in the show. Was it a trick? His bewildered green eyes looked up at the man's amused face, not sure what to do. All for One chuckled. Hello there, cutie. How do you like your surprise? Izuku stayed frozen in his captor's grasp, unable to process. The transformation, it had been so seamless. Like a blink, a snap. But his first transformation had hurt so much. Why? Why did he transform Izuku if there's no performance? I thought with all your bunny squeaks you'd be more amiable to talk. Izuku startled as the Ringmaster carried him till they reached his cot, settling him on it and kneeling before him. The scarred tissue pulled as another beguiling smile crawled over his face. Come now, Izuku. I changed your body, not your mind. What do you say when someone gives you a nice surprise? Swallowing, the child looked away from that vicious smile while blinking away tears. Thank you, he thought of the little children that had been at the performance, remembering the sound of their screams down that deep hat. A gloved hand cupped his cheek, making him flinch horribly. The man tipped his face up till glassy eyes once again looked into the faceless plane. Tears? He didn't sound particularly distressed for Izuku. Why is my little bunny upset? Perhaps he should have kept it to himself, but instead he broke down more, leaning into the hand that was such a threat. Those kids. You tricked them, Keiki. He couldn't finish, overcome by the memory. He pressed his hands over his eyes, as if the action could erase the nightmare. They were so little, and you just... The monster let out a soft chuckle. Small rabbit, I can't put on a show without my magic, and my magic can only stay strong by feeding. He brushed his hand through tufts of unruly hair. Surely it's better that my Nomu feast on those little morsels rather than you. Izuku looked up, stricken by the idea. And no. This is wrong, there has to be another way for magic to exist. Not like this. He wilted, leaning away in protest. All for one side. You're so much like him, too sensitive to the essence of true power. I suppose that's why I was drawn to your sweet nature, though. He stood abruptly, walking back towards his desk. All right, take a few moments if you need, bunny. But my gift to you will need to be put to use. Is it really a gift, then? Izuku muttered, wrapping his arms around himself despite the warm interior. The monster's smile was all teeth. Everything I do is for a reason, little one. My reason. He settled into his seat, twirling his hand to make a dark quill appear, papers rising from their piles and sliding before him. Much like when he had been trapped in his rabbit form, the man seemed to pretend like he was no longer there, getting to work on whatever terrible things required his attention. What does he want me to do? Izuku hunched into himself, spying on the man from under his green fringe. Is this a trick? Why would he turn me human? More importantly, why would he turn Izuku human and just leave him be on the far side of the space? Surely this was dangerous, surely. The child stilled, realizing the potential. He was human again. Could this be it? Could he chance an attempt at escaping? As if to ruin his plans, an arm stretched out to rest on Izuku's head. The monster hummed. So fluffy, he said, his clawed fingers curling into the strands, both as a human and a rabbit. Izuku hunched down, biting on his lip to avoid any nervous squeaks. The man didn't care, though, continuing to work at his desk while absent-mindedly petting Izuku's hair. Having his hair fondled wasn't what Izuku had expected when he was transformed back to a human. But talking back wouldn't benefit him, especially not so soon after being stuck in the hat dimension. Playing passive would also make it more likely he would later get a chance to escape. After a while of hair fondles and Izuku digging grooves into his lip, the flap of the tent was pushed open. What? Cried Tamura. Why's he? Tamura gestured with his hand, his nose crinkling at Izuku's non-rabbit form. The ringmaster chuckled. I thought he might enjoy the opportunity to stretch his legs. Besides, he said with a sly grin, beckoning Tamura over. He's still plenty enjoyable like this. He ran his clawed fingers through Izuku's hair and trailed his hands down to squish and pinch his cheeks. Stay, bunny, the monster chuckled as Izuku fidgeted. He turned to Tamura. Would you like a turn? Say no, Izuku internally begged, as Tamura scratched at his flaking neck. All right, Tamura muttered, ignoring Izuku's desperate wishes. His dry hands curled through Izuku's hairs, roughly tugging at the strands. It's soft, he muttered, the harsh tone of his voice changing. Try his cheeks, the ringmaster said bemusedly, sitting back at his desk with his face propped up on a hand. Please. Izuku started only for dirty fingers to smash his cheeks together, pressing his lips into a puckered shape. The ringmaster chuckled as Tamura pinched and stretched and tugged at Izuku's cheeks. Tamura's skin was harsh and abrasive, leaving light scratches against Izuku's face. But Tamura seemed to enjoy it, the disgust curling his lips softened, and a brightness entering his eyes. Izuku's foot jittered, and his hands curled into his clothes. Even as a human, he was treated as a pet. He wished he was a rabbit again, tucked in his metal cage. At least then, he would be away from the constant FNDLNG. Why don't you take Izuku for a walk? The ringmaster glanced pointedly at Izuku's nervous fidgeting. He could get some energy out before going back in his cage. Standing up from his desk, he walked over to a chest, retrieving something from inside. He's been confined to my tent for the past several weeks. Izuku blanched. Weeks? He didn't think it had been weeks. His mom would be worried sick. And school. He would be behind on so many assignments now. A click sounded, and weight settled around his neck. Izuku's hands flew up, tugging at the soft fabric encircling his neck. Do you like your collar, Izuku? The ringmaster asked, handing a velvet leash over to Tamura. Izuku's horror must have been apparent as the monster chuckled, cupping Izuku's face. I'd love to trust you, but I'm afraid you might go hopping off. Not that it matters, but I'd like to avoid wasting time running after naughty bunnies. He nodded to Tamura, who gave the leash a tug. Bring him back in an hour or so. He'll need some rest for tomorrow's show. Izuku glanced back at the ringmaster, but the creature seemed to have dismissed them, turning back to whatever work occupied him. His breath was caught in his throat as a harsh tug on the leash made him stumble forward. Don't drag your feet. Tamura grumbled irritably as he lifted the flap of the tent and exited. Izuku didn't know what to expect when he stepped out of the tent, so he braced himself for anything. But his anxiety seemed unfounded as they left the tent and the empty carnival greeted him. Izuku could still hear strange noises, but none of them seemed close. Where are we going? Izuku asked nervously as he was led away from the ringmaster's tent. They turned down the main strip of the carnival. Izuku glanced around at the empty booths. Where games, twinkling lights, and alluring foods had once been on display, everything appeared to be broken down. He quickly looked away from the cotton candy booth, where the walls of the tent were torn, as if ripped by claws, and dark stains tainted the bright colors. Didn't you listen? We're going on a walk. Tamura turned to look down at him. Izuku shrunk down a bit under his red gaze. His sandpaper-like hands reached out, and Izuku flinched as his cheeks were once again grabbed. Tamura pulled on them and Izuku's eyes pricked with tears at the stinging pinching. I like you better when you don't talk. Be quiet, Tamura said as if commanding a dog. Izuku nodded. Watery eyes cast down, appearing SBMSSV. He didn't know what Tamura would do if he acted out. The ringmaster seemed to hold a weird fondness for him, but Tamura was more volatile. Looking at him with disgust one moment and taking comfort in petting him the next. Tamura finally released his cheeks, no doubt leaving red marks behind. He then turned and walked through a gap between some of the booths, taking them off the walkways of the carnival. Izuku followed behind closely so that the collar wouldn't dig into his neck. Just as they emerged from the narrow gap, Izuku felt something was over his head. He felt his hair in confusion and then jumped in the air as a squeal broke the relative quiet around them. It's the bunny boy, a girl's voice exclaimed. Izuku turned, alarmed that there might be another surviving audience member in the carnival. Instead he saw a girl standing there watching him with excitement. Multiple large knives clutched in her hands. Dressed in a red and white leotard with her hair put up in two messy buns. Izuku remembered seeing her during the performances, a girl swinging high above the ring on swings and performing with great agility. The acrobat. By the time Izuku blinked, she was in front of him leaning into his face. She still had the glittery makeup from the show on, but she didn't look quite human this close up. Her ears were just a little pointed, her golden eyes cat-like, and her teeth much sharper than they should be. Before Izuku could react to having a face full of this strange girl, Tamura grasped his collar and pulled him away from her and roughly into the peeling man's side. Izuku choked, but no one seemed bothered by it. Don't touch him. He's not yours, Tamura growled, making the girl pout. You already killed one rabbit, Sensei will be far more upset if something happens to this one. Yeah, stay away, rabbits are ugly diseased rodents, Toga, came a call on the other side of them. Izuku glanced backwards to see another strange character. A man completely covered in a full-body leotard of some sort. Hadn't he been assisting her on the trapeze? Bunnies are so adorable, he exclaimed in a nicer voice not a second later, contradicting his own words. The man stood there, his back against a propped-up wooden board. Knives surrounded him, nearly outlining his body. Izuku paled as he realized he had felt a knife go over his head when they had emerged. Tamura was already moving away from them, seemingly ignoring or not bothering to acknowledge the comments. Izuku was dragged along with him as they sat down at a long table with benches on either side. Izuku didn't know if he should be grateful that Tamura was keeping him close or not. He certainly didn't know the other two people here or what they would do to him if he was alone. As much as he disliked Tamura, Toga had apparently killed a rabbit, or another human-turned-rabbit. So he didn't resist or protest as he was forced to sit side by side with Tamura. Did you get stuck with babysitting? Izuku glanced up to see someone else sauntering over and sitting across from Tamura. The black spiky hair and cyan eyes were sharp. But Izuku couldn't help but stare at the horribly mutilated person in front of him. Skin burned horribly, discolored and appearing to be only held together by staples. It looked even worse than the first time he'd seen the man collecting tickets to the circus. At the time he and his mother had believed the man to be using makeup to create fake injuries, but now it seemed he'd been hiding worse ones instead. Sensei wanted me to take him on a walk, Tamura said, glancing at Izuku. Then shouldn't you be walking? The other asked with an arched eyebrow and a smirk. Shut up, Tamura said with annoyance. Tired. Izuku looked back and forth between the two, unsure of what to do as they chatted in front of him. The other caught him looking and turned to him. It's rude to stare, the black-haired man said, his words accented by a few blue flames whispering out of his mouth, making Izuku jump back a bit. Tamura pulled him back with a scowl. Izuku finally remembered this man had also been the carnival fire breather. His hair color had switched to white when he'd performed in the ring. Hair dye or another glamour? Why is he even human right now? I thought the Ringmaster would have twisted him by now, the man said. Sensei has plans for him, I guess. Tamura shrugged, both of them talking as if Izuku wasn't sitting there. Whatever, the other said, shrugging as well. When are we moving on? That last audience wasn't that big. I think we've drained this town of anyone who'd be coming. It's getting boring. Besides that rabbit, I don't see what we've obtained in this area. Sensei thinks we can still get a few more performances in before we need to move on. You shouldn't question him, Dabi. Tamura glared at the idea that the Ringmaster had bad judgment. Izuku tensed up. They were still near his town? Where would they move on to after this? Would he ever be able to find his way home if he got away somewhere else? Izuku tuned out the rest of the conversation as his mind spiraled. Time was so hard to tell in this carnival. How much time did he have left to escape? Izuku was so caught up in his own mind that he barely noticed anything happening. So when he felt a tug on his head he snapped out of it. It must almost be time to take you back, Tamura said almost absent-mindedly. Izuku glanced up at him to see that it wasn't his hair that Tamura had tugged on. It was an ear, a rabbit ear that had sprouted from his head without his notice. The Ringmaster had timed his spell well. Come on. Tamura stood and pulled Izuku up with him. Bye-bye bunny. Toga called after them. Both she and the two voices guy were sitting at the table as well, having joined it while Izuku was internally panicking. The other people disappeared behind the booths once more, and Izuku and Tamura were alone. Walking along the broken tents again. Izuku walked mechanically. He was going to be turned back into a bunny again. Trapped in a cage for however long until the next performance where he would be used to bait more people to their death. His cheeks felt wet and Izuku realized he was crying silently. Tamura was walking ahead of him, not even glancing back at him. He looked relaxed. The leash held loosely, guard down because he was close to finishing his job. Izuku suddenly didn't care what Tamura would do to him. Or what the Ringmaster would do. It couldn't be worse than helping them kill people. So Izuku gripped the leash, his rabbit ears twitching nervously and taking a deep breath. And then he yanked as hard as he could out of the blue. The leash was ripped from Tamura's lax grip, and Izuku was already running. Not waiting to see what expression Tamura had. Izuku heard a shout of surprise. It quickly morphed into a scream that might have been anger and might have been fear. Izuku couldn't be bothered to find out. Broken tents and stalls passed by him, the same path that he had taken a minute ago, the same main street that would take him right back to where the other performers of the carnival would be. He couldn't go back there, the layout of the carnival seemed to twist and turn, so maybe it was a useless cause to try and remember where he should go to get out. More importantly, he needed to get somewhere where he could stop, think, and plan, not out in the open where he would just instantly be caught again. Throwing a glance over his shoulder, Izuku almost screamed as he saw that Tamura was much closer than he had expected, hand reaching out to grab the back of his neck just as Izuku dodged down, moved to the side and crashed through the thrashed fabric of a tent on the side. He must have struck one of the poles supporting the tent as it fell down over him, for a moment trapping him before he managed to pull himself free, and he found himself in the area behind the stalls and tent of the main streets, smaller and winding paths, that he could lose Tamura in, and hopefully not be lost himself, he thought, pushing that strain of fear away. Something cut into him as he ran, but Izuku couldn't stop, couldn't even allow himself a hiss of pain as he dodged through small open spaces. His leash caught on a wooden nail for a moment, choking him before he managed to pull himself free, wrapping the rope around his arm to prevent it happening again. It had made him lose precious seconds, and from the noises behind him, he hadn't managed yet to escape from Tamura. The man was surprisingly quick, unexpected from the way that he looked. He needed some place to hide. Piled up behind what might have been a game of fish lay dozens of stuffed animals, and without really thinking it through, he jumped into the pile, burying himself underneath a bare-looking thing. The smell was horrible, rotten and musky, the toys damp and pressing down on him far more heavily, and clunky than stuffed animals should be. It might have been because of how strangely waterlogged they were, obviously having been left out in the open for quite some time. Whether they were actually stuffed with cotton or something else, Izuku was desperate not to find out. Belatedly, he realized he had forgotten the ears, sticking up in alertness in his own fear. Izuku scrambled to grab a hold of them, pressing them down against the side of his skull. He hadn't noticed the transformation before. Would it continue? If he got out, then maybe it would stop. Being small meant that it would be so much easier to hide, but what if he never was able to turn back again? What if? Get back here! A crashing noise, followed by Tamura's frantic and furious voice carried over. He couldn't help the squeak that jumped out of his mouth, and then bit his tongue as he heard it. It sounded like Tamura was much closer than he actually was, making calls and threats that Izuku did not see how they would convince him to return to the peeling man. Did the transformation help his hearing? Against his better sense, Izuku moved just a little bit, pushing on the arm of one of the stuffed prizes to look up ahead. Between the cracks in an abandoned stall, he saw Tamura, pacing, red gaze swinging over the area and drifting over to where he was. Izuku couldn't move, he should pull back and hide himself fully again. If Tamura looked too close he might be able to see him, but Izuku couldn't move. The instinctual freeze, playing dead, stuck him in place. Just as Tamura was starting to head closer, gaze still looking around, a blur of white and red dropped down in front of him, coming from somewhere above. The peeling man didn't even flinch more than send a glare her way. Where did Bunny go? He heard the lilting voice of the acrobat that Tamura had been with earlier, the disappointment clear in her tone. Did you already give him back? Or, she gave a dramatized gasp, lifting her hands, both of which carried a knife each to her face in mock fear. Izuku could not see her face, but he could hear her grin. Did you lose him? Tamura, you're in trouble. Shut up and help me find him. Tamura hissed back, right as she turned around and put her arm in his, dragging him further away. I will. But if I find him you won't be mad if I accidentally nick him a little bit, right? Their voices faded, disappeared down another path, and Izuku pressed his hands against his mouth, trying to slow his racing heart. It was silent. Much too silent. Swallowing, Izuku shuffled out from the pile of rotten prizes that he had hid in, and started to creep down the path, when there was a rustling noise up ahead. Izuku felt his new ears twitch, standing up alert for the newest sound. A small girl fell out of the tent. Her hair was in a mess, one of two twintails hanging loose, her blue dress missing part of its sleeves, where it looked like something had tried to claw through. There was red dripping down that same arm. She looked human, sniffling, trying to keep quiet as she hesitantly looked around. Towards where the acrobat and Tamura had disappeared. Izuku should have hid, but instead he froze. It was one of the children. He remembered her going up to him with such a bright smile. Now, it was all gone. Had she escaped? Was that even possible? He didn't have time to react when her head swiveled his way. Tears in her eyes, dripping down her face. He should run. He should have got away, but the mere possibility had him stuck as he found himself taking a step towards her. He opened his mouth, for a moment only finding noises, before his body remembered how words worked. He could still speak. Do you need help? Izuku asked, his own voice shaking as she looked at him. Her eyes drifted down to where a small cut had formed on his arm from before, and her face suddenly turned flush in the meager light. You are just too cute. The girl twisted and morphed, smile too big for the face and fangs and sharp teeth in the grin, her joints bending the wrong way and elongating, the colors of her clothes fading from blue to crystal white, bloodstains almost drawing into the clothes as the acrobat unfolded herself. Tamura. I found him. Tamura's grip on Izuku's wrist was bruising as he dragged him through the camp. Izuku stumbled as he tried to keep up with the long strides. Tamura, slow down, he begged. You're hurting me. You're supposed to say thank you, Tamura snapped back. For not feeding you to the Nomas for trying to run. Don't do that, please. You're not as noisy when you're a rabbit. I like you better that way. And Sensei will be the one to decide how you die, not me. You're going to tell him? Izuku was mortified. Please don't. We'll both get in trouble. Tamura paused, but only slightly. It's all your fault, anyways. No, Tamura. Izuku dug his heels into the ground. Please, please. I'll do anything. I'll let you pet me and play with me whenever you want. I can already do that. Tamura reminded him. I'll cuddle with you too. Izuku desperately tried to think of anything else he could offer to bargain with. I'll be good, I promise. Please don't tell him. Without knowing what else to do, he launched himself into Tamura's chest and hugged him, crying onto his shirt. Please, Tamura, please. After a moment, he was surprised to feel the older boy return his embrace, holding him in place with one arm and using the other to pet his hair. Was it actually working? He nuzzled deeper into Tamura's arms, choking back a GG at the smell of decay that clung to him. Please, please don't tell him, Izuku begged again. Tell me what? Both boys froze, Izuku's sobs stuttering to a stop along with his heart. He felt a large hand join Tamura's on his head, fingers rubbing at the base of his bunny ears. Well? Are you two hiding something from me? All for one asked. Izuku glanced up at Tamura, eyes pleading. Izuku wanted to spend the night with me, Tamura replied. Slowly, subconsciously pulling the smaller boy closer to him. Izuku nearly let out a sigh of relief. He hadn't tattled. Interesting. All for one dug his fingers a little deeper into Izuku's scalp. Yeah, something about him not wanting to be alone at night, Tamura lied again. He was too scared to ask you, since you're always busy, but he thinks you would get jealous or something. All for one lightly twisted his fingers into Izuku's hair and pulled it back, forcing him to look up at the man towering behind him. Well, Izuku? He couldn't lie. He wouldn't be able to. So he didn't. It's scary. Izuku answered in a small voice. All for one held him there for a moment, studying him carefully. At last, he released him. Not tonight, Bunny. Tell Tamura thank you for the walk and good night. Izuku sniffed and dried his eyes. Thank you, Tamura. Gee, good night. Tamura grabbed his cheeks, pinching hard. Remember your promise. He let go, leaving Izuku rubbing his sore cheeks. He was in Tamura's debt now, but it was better than All for One finding out about his escape attempt. Did you have fun today, Izuku? All for One took his attention again, grabbing his face with both hands. Izuku swallowed and nodded. Good. If you're a good little bunny, maybe we can do this again sometime, Izuku nodded again, blinking when the Ringmaster bent down to kiss the tip of his nose. I'm sure you must be tired after such a long day. You'll rest well tonight and I can start teaching you new tricks in the morning. All for One observed his bunny sleeping fitfully in his cage. It was amusing how he and Tamura thought All for One didn't already know about the escape attempt. Something would have to be done in the future to ensure neither boy lied to him again, but right now he was just going to enjoy making them nervous with vague comments about their walk. After this, Tamura would be more watchful of the little bunny to ensure nothing like this happened again, and Izuku should be more wary of trying to escape. All for One thought there might be one more attempt before his bunny learned his place. Next time he wouldn't be so merciful. There had only ever been one human to escape his grasp. The same human responsible for the scarring on the top half of his face. The blonde oaf had gotten his hands on one of the doctor's magic experiments and caused an injury that All for One couldn't entirely heal. The doctor had paid dearly for his mistake, but with his eyesight impaired, the Ringmaster could only injure the human, allowing him to escape, swearing to come back and destroy his circus. There had been no sign of him ever since. That being said, if the idiot ever did return, All for One would be happy to finish what he'd started so many years ago. Stop squirming, Tamura hissed, holding Izuku tighter to his chest. You promised. You're squeezing too tight. Izuku whined back, wiggling to get free. I am not. You always hold me too tight, Izuku complained. Because you always try to run away. What's this about running away? All for One asked as he stepped back into the tent. Izuku jumped and started shaking. Tamura gave him another squeeze and answered. Izuku promised he would let me snuggle him, but he keeps trying to get away from me. All for One hummed thoughtfully as he walked over to them. He placed a hand on Izuku's head and Izuku whimpered. Perhaps if you were more gentle with him? He's very breakable, you know. Tamura frowned. But he'll try to get away. Let me show you. All for One forced Tamura to loosen his grip and arranged Izuku into a more comfortable position in his lap. Izuku's natural instinct was to curl away from the Ringmaster and directly into Tamura. See? That's better, isn't it? Now pet him softly and let him relax. Tamura's hand started combing through Izuku's hair, stroking the bunny ears that the Ringmaster hadn't gotten rid of. His eyes softened as he fell into a rhythm, settling back against the chair they were curled up on. All for One was still standing over them, watching. Izuku buried his head into Tamura's smelly sweater to hide from him. He and Tamura had a pact now, didn't they? So Tamura would keep him safe. He hoped. Tamura grinned and looked up at the Ringmaster, clearly excited that Izuku was actually cuddling with him. Izuku just did his best to stay close to Tamura. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than before. The older boy was being more gentle, hugging and petting him softly. If he could endure this until the spell ended, then he could go back in his cage and be alone. He had already suffered through another performance and several training sessions. He could make it. At last, All for One told Tamura that time was up. Tamura left, looking grumpy, and Izuku started walking back towards his cage. Where do you think you're going? All for One stopped him, wrapping his arms around him from behind. Why, you said time was up, Izuku stuttered. Yes, that's right. The bottom half of All for One's remaining face grinned. He picked Izuku up and sat down on the chair again with the boy in his lap. For Tamura. Now it's my turn, little bunny. Let's see if your practice with him has paid off. Cuddle up, bunny. This was hell. How long had Izuku been stuck like this? A few days? Maybe a week? Surely it couldn't have been longer than a week. Inko's hands felt numb with cold. She could barely see out of eyes swollen from crying and lack of sleep. Even so, she tacked up another missing person poster to the lamppost. After the circus had thrown her out, Inko had gone to the police. But all records of her son had vanished. No one had believed her. Everyone else had forgotten Izuku's existence. Even Inko sometimes started to get a bit hazy about the exact color of his eyes and the number of his freckles. Whenever she felt like she might be starting to forget, she clutched her head and repeated her son's name over and over again until her memories held steady. Inko feared the day would come when she completely forgot Izuku like everyone else. Of course Inko had tried to track down the circus. They'd left town immediately, so she'd searched for other advertisements. The circus never posted online and they moved around the entire world seemingly at random, making them insanely hard to track down. They didn't pop up often either. Inko had found some other parents with stories of missing children. But those parents stopped searching as they forgot their children. Another teary mother had told Inko that she could no longer remember her daughter's name. Briefly Inko had met with a woman named Rei Todoroki who was in a mental hospital because she kept claiming her oldest son had been kidnapped, a son no one else remembered. By the time Inko arrived, Rei had finally admitted to the doctors that Tuya had never existed. They took this as a great sign for her recovery. It had filled Inko with sick horror, seeing where she probably would have ended up if she'd had a family to notice her so-called delusions. Even so, Inko kept traveling, chasing after whispers of All for One's mysterious circus and putting up missing person posters in every city. Even though it had been a full year since Izuku had gone missing. Izuku tried not to squirm too much, but it was hard when so close to the creature that had brought him such torment. All for One sat at his desk in his tent as usual, scribbling on a rather antique parchment with a quill. He was absent-mindedly petting the rabbit that he had in his lap as he leaned back to observe the papers. It always confused Izuku how the creature read what he had written when he had no eyes. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut when All for One rubbed a finger between his ears, the talon-like fingernail scratching lightly along his head. The Ringmaster let out a hum as if he was deep in thought. From what Izuku had seen of the papers, they were scrawled with strange symbols and runes, lots of complicated circles and designs. Likely, the Ringmaster was looking for a new way to bring more monstrosities to life with these designs. Izuku shivered at the thought. He unfortunately learned how those monsters in the hat were made after stumbling upon a tent with a circle like that on the floor, and the scraps of the last audience placed around it. "Are you cold, Bunny?" All for One asked, suddenly snapping him from the horrific memories. Izuku hadn't realized he was trembling from the traumatic memory until the Ringmaster set the quill aside and plucked him from his lap. He held Izuku against his chest and pet him. Maybe it would have been comforting from anyone else but this monster. "Sensei." Relief washed over Izuku as Tamura ducked into the tent and All for One turned to him, attention shifting away from the helpless rabbit. While the other boy certainly wasn't what Izuku would call a friend, it seemed they had come to a mutual understanding. Despite Tamura's temperamental attitude, he longed for affection. Affection none of the other circus performers seemed willing to give without seeing it as a weakness. As long as Izuku played along to help fill Tamura's need for love, the other boy actually let him have a bit more freedom than he had anywhere else in the carnival. "What is it, Tamura?" All for One asked, still petting Izuku. "Can I have Izuku? I want to play with him." Tamura asked, scratching at his neck. Izuku perked his ears with hope. While Tamura still kept him on a leash, he let Izuku choose where they went and sometimes answered his questions about this nightmare of a carnival. Every little bit of information could help him escape. All for One's hand froze over him and in confusion Izuku looked up only to see the Ringmaster's eyeless gaze on him. "Not tonight," All for One said simply, shocking both boys. In the time that Izuku had been here he hadn't heard All for One deny many of Tamura's requests. If anything, All for One seemed to indulge the peeling boy more than any of the others that lurked on the circus grounds. Tamura blinked in disbelief as well. "Why not?" Tamura asked, pouting like a child. "Tamura," All for One said in an icy tone that immediately made the other boy bow his head in SBMSN. The display seemed to please All for One and he smiled his unnatural grin that displayed far too many teeth. "While I'm pleased you have become quite taken with the newest addition to our performance, you shouldn't question me." "I didn't mean to do that, Sensei." Tamura quickly rectified like a guilt-ridden puppy. All for One stood keeping one hand pinning Izuku to his chest and reaching out with the other to ruffle Tamura's hair. "It's all right. I can understand your eagerness," All for One said, his reassurance making Tamura look up from the ground. "But I do need time with our bunny. Perhaps your legion of outcasts can entertain you for tonight?" Tamura's eyes flickered to Izuku before he reluctantly nodded. Izuku felt his hope for a bit of time away from All for One deflate into despair as the tall boy turned and left the tent, leaving him alone again with the monster. All for One sat down again and regarded the rabbit he held. Izuku barely registered his attention before smoke engulfed him and he was sitting in his more human form. Still bitterly sporting rabbit ears though, something the Ringmaster seemed fond of keeping him with. My bunny, All for One said, reaching to grasp Izuku's chin and force him to stare into that eyeless face. Izuku's eyes watered at the feeling of All for One's claws pricking his cheeks, threatening to gouge flesh. You've been getting rather excited whenever Tamura shows up lately, haven't you? He's been getting better, Izuku murmured with difficulty around the ironclad grip the Ringmaster had on his chin. He's been nicer. Has he? All for One asking while tilting his head. With the way you perked up when he came in just now, I'm almost suspicious that you prefer his presence to mine. Izuku's heart nearly stuttered to a stop. Was the Ringmaster getting jealous? All for One didn't seem to need Izuku to answer to already know the truth. Izuku yelped aloud as the claws on his cheeks dug in, causing blood to trickle down his chin and his hands to fly up to try and pry the Ringmaster's hand off of him. You and Tamura should do well to remember who owns you both, All for One growled at him before finally releasing him. Izuku knew better than to try to get away from him, so he instead reached to feel the new wounds on his face, wincing at the sting of them. Fat tears ran down his cheeks, making the crimson turn a light pink while All for One watched him tremble. You poor thing, All for One tooted at Izuku's terrified state. Izuku didn't resist when the Ringmaster wrapped arms around him and led him to lay his head on his shoulder, offering comfort as if he hadn't been the one to inflict the damage. It was only made worse from the tingle of magic that laced through Izuku, the boy being held down so he wouldn't squirm away from the feeling. His wounds closed, but it only made Izuku feel sick and more anxious. Every time All for One used magic on him, it felt like he was losing more of humanity. Tashinori stood staring at the flimsy paper tacked carelessly to the side of the grubby building. He gulped as he ripped it from its place and stared at the alluring bold colors and promises of an unforgettable night. The poster looked the same as it had all those years ago. A nightmare that had haunted him for years after he'd fled from the Fey monster. In his entire town, only Tashinori had remembered the circus and the missing children. Since then, he'd become unusually strong and his aging had stopped. He'd chased after the circus for decades without success. He'd nearly convinced himself maybe the monster had died of the injuries he'd inflicted. But it was back again. Izuku hugged close to Tamura's side as they walked around the littered carnival grounds. His bunny ears were quivering, and he had a distant, frightened look on his face. Even when Tamura handed him a stick of bright pink cotton candy, he still appeared unsettled. What's wrong? Tamura asked when Izuku didn't take a bite. Izuku stared at the treat, then took a tentative bite. His round face twisted and tears sprang up in his eyes. He slowly spit the teat out, grimacing. Why did you spit it out? Tamura demanded. It tastes really gross. Izuku cried. I think there's something wrong with me. All the food I eat tastes like dirt, and yesterday I touched some metal and it burned me. You touched iron? Tamura asked quickly. Izuku sniffed and looked up at him. The older boy was grinning, looking positively delighted. This is great. He took the cotton candy and tossed it aside, hugging Izuku tight instead. Do you know what this means? What? Izuku asked. Am I going to die? Of course you aren't going to die. Tamura laughed. Don't be so dramatic. You're turning into one of us. You can't eat human food anymore. We have to tell Sensei. And no. Izuku cried, horrified. I don't want to be like you. Tamura, you have to help me get away. Please. Before it's too late. It's not too late already, is it? Get away? Tamura frowned, clearly confused. What do you mean? You don't want to leave me, Izuku, do you? Tamura, I miss my mom. Izuku blinked up at him, hoping he looked cute and vulnerable. I can't stay here forever. I don't belong here. Tamura pulled Izuku closer and stroked his ears a few times. Izuku couldn't read his expression. Would he really help him escape? So what you're saying is that you want to run away, Tamura repeated slowly. Izuku gave a very small nod. You're going to run away and leave me here all by myself. Why, you can come with me. Izuku offered. Mom would love you. I can't leave, Izu. Tamura growled, locking his embrace. Izuku quickly squirmed to free himself, realizing that his plan had backfired. You can't leave either. Wasn't I nice to you? Don't you want to stay here with me? Ow. Tamura, you're hurting me. Izuku begged. I can't believe you have all of mine and Sensei's love and you just want to leave. He even let you become one of us. Tamura picked Izuku up and threw him over his shoulder. I'm taking you back to Sensei. No. Izuku screamed and kicked. Tamura, please. He's going to get mad, he'll hurt me. Please, please. Can't you keep it a secret like last time? Tamura didn't answer, just walked as quickly as he could back to the Ringmaster's tent. Sensei. Izuku said he wanted to run away. No. Izuku screamed louder. What's all this ruckus? All for One asked. Tamura, why are you carrying our little bunny that way? Izuku's turning into a fae and he wants to run away. Tamura blabbered. He can't go. He's our bunny. All for One picked the squirming bunny boy off of Tamura's shoulder. Is that true, Izuku? And no. Izuku sobbed. Don't hurt me, please. I was wondering why you had barely eaten these last few days. All for One was smiling for some reason. So your transformation has already started? You should have said something. No need to be so scared. Izuku whimpered and tried to pull back. Tamura is lying. I don't want to run away. I want to stay here with you. You said you wanted to leave. Tamura shot back angrily. Don't yell, Tamura. Can't you see that our poor little bunny is starving? All for One quieted him. Why don't you go and find him some real food to eat? None of that human garbage. I'll take it from here. Tamura opened and closed his mouth a few times, but in the end he left them alone. Izuku longed for him to stay, even if the older boy was still angry with him. Were you scared about the changes? All for One asked, petting Izuku's hair and fndlng his bunny ears. You could have told me, bunny. Am I in trouble? Izuku cried, barely hearing him. For not telling me about how you've been changing? I'm not mad about that, darling. All for One stroked his ears a few more times before he went on. For wanting to run away from me though, yes, you are very much in trouble for that, little one. No. Izuku gasped. Please don't be mad. I was just scared. I didn't know what was wrong with me. This isn't the first time you've tried to run from me, bunny. And it isn't the second either. Yes, I know about last time, don't look so surprised. Do you really think I should forgive you a third time? Izuku cried harder and nodded. I'm sorry. I just want to see my mom again. I'm sorry, please don't hurt me. Perhaps I could forgive you, if you do one thing for me. What is it? I want you to smile nice and big at the show tonight. If you can feed all of my nomas, I'll forgive you. If not, well, I think you should know what will happen then. That's mean. Izuku whimpered. Can you do it? All for One's claws slowly began tightening into his curls. Can you be a happy little bunny for a few hours? Or do I have to tell Tamura how you were only trying to use him to escape? He'll be heartbroken. No. Izuku wailed again. If Tamura turned against him, he would have no one left to protect him. Don't do that. I can do it, I'll do it. Please just don't hurt me. Good. All for One relaxed his fingers and kissed the top of Izuku's head. Now let's talk more about these changes you're going through so you don't have to be afraid anymore. I didn't think I would ever have another baby fae to look after. This should be a lot of fun. The ribbon pulled tight against his neck, nearly feeling like a noose to him. Izuku swallowed and tried not to show how much it bothered him. He had to remain cheerful, at least outwardly. The ringmaster's eyeless gaze stared down at him. Both of them were dressed up, preparing for a performance. Izuku could even vaguely hear the crowds of the unsuspecting victims not far off from the tent they stood in. You always look adorable in your little suit, All for One said as he finished tying the bow a bit lopsidedly around Izuku's neck. A perfect little fae in the making. Alluring these lost souls to our home. The monster reached up to straighten Izuku's bunny ears. Izuku took the hint and perked them up. It was hard to remember to control them still. Were droopy ears considered a giveaway to an unhappy mood? Smile. All for One commanded, making Izuku tilt his chin up. Izuku forced one onto his face, hoping it would be satisfying enough that the ringmaster would deem it good enough for the show. Apparently it was because the fae returned the smile with one of his own unnaturally white and wide. Izuku hated it. Looks like we are ready for a great performance. I hope you remember our deal for a captive audience, All for One reminded him, as if it hadn't plagued Izuku's mind. He would be punished if even one person wasn't caught in the glamour of the show. All for One had explained that everyone needed to give their best for the magic to work correctly. And now that included Izuku as well since the fae had infected him like a virus. Izuku nodded. He had reasoned with himself that everyone in the audience was already doomed the moment they had decided to come here. Even if Izuku didn't play along, Tamura, the others, and All for One didn't plan to let a single soul escape. It was best to just go along with it. For now. He didn't want to find out what the punishment would be. Excellent, bunny, All for One said, pleased. He placed a hand on Izuku's back. A familiar puff of smoke engulfed Izuku and he was once again in his rabbit form, trapped in the palm of All for One's hand. If there was one good thing about slowly becoming fae, it was that All for One claimed he would soon be able to control his shape-shifting. Izuku hoped that wasn't a lie. Into the hat Izuku was dropped. The now familiar dark engulfed him and Izuku sat stock still in the darkness, on the fleshy ground and waited like a good rabbit. He hated himself for this. But what more could he do? Maybe once he became more fae-like he would be able to do something about his situation. He hoped so. And he hoped the change wouldn't trap him in this circus forever. Growls, pants, and MMMMs echoed in the shadows around him. A tension in the air rose as those things the Ringmaster created lurked nearby. Izuku tucked his little rabbit form into a ball. The closest he could get to hugging himself for comfort. Those things were going to eat people tonight. He felt sick, disgusted, and angry. And useless. All for One had made Tamura fetch some strange pink fruit that sparkled in the light for Izuku to eat. It was the sweetest thing Izuku had ever tasted. Pixie fruit, All for One had called it. Apparently Fae preferred food from a realm not shared with humans. The sweet, juicy fruits would be what Izuku was fed from now on. A Fae child's diet. But All for One hadn't been subtle when he implied that meat Fae ate was likely the same that the Nomus ate. Human. Meat was a delicacy to Fae. Not required to live though. So Izuku didn't need to partake in it. But Izuku knew it wouldn't stop All for One or Tamura from trying to get him to eat with them one day. He just had to get away before that day ever arrived. Izuku shivered in the cold of this realm. What was this hat? Was this part of the Fae realm? He didn't think so. Tamura had told him All for One was banished from the Fae realm. Hence why the circus was All for One's home. Tamura and the others were the ones who gathered supplies from the Fae realm. But they would never know when they too would be banished. The carnival was the backup. Human flesh could let them survive if they were ever truly cut off from the other realm. Izuku didn't know what other Fae were like. But they had to be better than what he was stuck with. Especially if they had banned All for One from their realm. Izuku did wonder why All for One was banned, but looking at what he had done to humans, he doubted the Fae was much better to his own kind. A brushing against Izuku's fur made him let out a terrified squeak as he was ripped from his thoughts. But it was the hand of the Ringmaster clamping around him, pulling him out for the show. Time really was strange inside the hat. Izuku had only seconds to prepare himself before he was dragged back into a bright world with dazzling lights and overwhelming sounds. Izuku blinked rapidly and his little nose twitched a mile a minute as he was presented before a crowd with thunderous applause. Static filled his ears as he stared at them. So many. So unsuspecting. All for One was speaking, his deep voice whimsical with his performance, but Izuku didn't need to hear it to know what to do. He was poofed back into his human form. The Ringmaster's hand on his shoulder had him quickly throwing on a smile for the crowd and waving. Going through the motions as All for One shifted different parts of Izuku's body to the astonishment of the crowd. Just keep smiling. Just bear it. A little longer. Don't look too closely at these dead people. He'd regret it. His cheeks hurt from smiling. He couldn't wait to be back in rabbit form. At least then he wouldn't have to worry about hiding his expressions. Turn and wiggle his tail at the crowd. Try to block out the laughter of the children. How much longer was this? His eyes watered, but he forced the tears down. He couldn't break character now. Finally a bow. Izuku felt a wave of relief wash through him as All for One grasped him and brought him back to his bunny form. Izuku burrowed his face into the crook of All for One's arm as the show concluded with shining lights, glitter, and the climax of all the other performers while All for One faded away from the center of attention. Izuku could feel the shadows of Toga fly over them for her final flip in her acrobatics display as the music crashed to a close. And then it was over. The crowds clapping and All for One exiting the tent to wait by the entrance. Likely to use Izuku as bait like before. He didn't want to be here for this again. And All for One must have noticed the way Izuku was curling up. You did well, my bunny. All for One said, sounding too pleased. Are you tired? Sensing the Ringmaster's good mood, Izuku untucked his rabbit face to look up at him in what he hoped was a pleading look. All for One chuckled. Fine. You were good. All for One said as the crowds inside the tent began to shuffle towards the exit. I'll drop you off so you can rest. Izuku was swiftly carried away from the tent before the bulk of the audience reached the exit. He practically melted with relief as they went straight to the Ringmaster's tent. He was set inside the cage All for One kept him in when no one could spare the time to watch him. I'll be back soon. Dinner calls. All for One petted him a few more times before turning and exiting the tent. Not even a few seconds later the screaming began. Izuku couldn't block it out, not with these cursed rabbit ears that could practically pick up everything. So he was forced to sit and listen to the slaughter going on. The screams came from everywhere. Every person in the carnival probably partook in the hunting. Plus All for One releasing his monstrosities onto them. Maybe he would have preferred to be in the hat instead of out here. At least in the hat the screams came from far away. Izuku's ears twitched as he picked up the sound of footsteps approaching the tent. Had Tamura left the slaughter early to come and get him? He'd probably be eager to spend time with him some more after All for One being a bit more reserved with their time together. Not by much mind you, Izuku still spent quite a bit of time with the decaying teen. But still the Ringmaster had put a limit on it. The entrance swished open and Izuku sat up to see something that made his heart stop. It wasn't Tamura. And it wasn't All for One. Or any of the others. Instead, sapphire eyes and golden hair poked into the tent. The stranger's scent reached his nose and automatically registered as pure and good, not entirely human but not tainted as the other fae. The man's eyes fell on Izuku, and Izuku froze as the man hurried inside to him. "Hello there," the stranger whispered hurriedly, reaching the cage. "You're Izuku Midoriya, right?" Izuku stared in shock. What was this man up to? The man lifted the latch on his cage and reached inside. Izuku scrambled back on instinct. Was this some sort of trick from All for One? How did this man know his name? Why would he assume this rabbit and the boy he saw in the performance were the same? "We don't have much time," the man said, holding out his hand for Izuku. "I know what's happening in this carnival." In the distance, another scream rang out. They were becoming fewer and far between. The number of victims must be dwindling. "Your eyes look just like a boy I saw on a missing poster. Besides, you somehow feel different, like me. You are Midoriya, aren't you?" Yes. Yes, he was. Was this a chance to escape? Izuku took a tentative step forward. The man gave him a strained smile. "My name is Toshinori Yagi. I can get us out of here," Toshinori said. Izuku still paused, unsure about this. But he didn't have much of a choice before Toshinori took the initiative to grab him. He let out a surprised yelp. Sorry. But we don't have time to drag our feet, kid," Toshinori said, holding the squirming rabbit. "Please don't fight me on this. I promise I'm just trying to help." Toshinori tried to get him to settle. Izuku's heart beat erratically, panic from this stranger and the echoing screams. He couldn't calm down. And then he heard it. More footsteps coming back. Izuku looked up at the stranger Toshinori. He looked worried and scared too. If he was caught with Izuku didn't even want to think about what would happen. So channeling his panic, he bit the man's hand. Toshinori must not have been expecting it because he had the natural reaction. He fumbled with the tiny rabbit before dropping him. "Kid, don't," Toshinori started to say, only to stop and look towards the entrance of the tent as Izuku vaguely heard Tamura call out to All for One just outside the tent. The footsteps stopped close to the entrance. Toshinori's eyes widened with the same panic Izuku felt. Izuku hopped off to hide under the Ringmaster's desk. Toshinori made a move to go after him before thinking better of it and crouching, lifting the back end of the tent for a quick escape. Toshinori locked eyes with the hidden rabbit. There was a promise in that gaze. But Izuku wasn't sure the man could keep it. The man disappeared and the heavy canvas fell back into place, cutting off Izuku's chance of escape. But Izuku knew that if he'd left with the man they would be hunted down before ever reaching the edge of the carnival. At least like this Izuku might distract All for One for precious seconds for the man to escape. Still he couldn't stop the trembling that rippled across his tiny body. Because he knew this wouldn't go unpunished. Even if it had been out of Izuku's control. So the swish of the tent flap caused dread to seize Izuku's tiny thundering heart. He saw the way All for One's shiny dress shoes paused. Likely staring at the empty and open cage. A few footsteps and the monster was then standing in front of the desk. And then he crouched. Izuku huddled in the corner terrified of the mutilated face that greeted him. "Oh bunny, and you were doing so well tonight?" Toshinori Yagi had been waiting outside the apartment building for hours. He knew the people passing by were starting to wonder about him. Hunching over his shoulders, he tried to look harmless. Finally, Inko Midoriya stepped outside. Toshinori ran up to her. "Ma'am, I have important news. I'm not interested in buying anything." She pulled up her coat collar and walked away. Toshinori chased after her. "We spoke last week while you were putting up missing person posters." Although it had been a brief conversation, people tended to remember Toshinori with his giant height and sickly appearance. He had a very bad feeling. Still, he foraged on. "Ma'am, I found your son, Izuku Midoriya." He reached out toward her. "I never had a child," Inko said coldly. "Go away before I call the police." Toshinori let his hand fall down. It was no good. He'd argued with many magic curse people before, to no effect. She'd lost her memories. Izuku tripped over something unseen. But he didn't dare make a sound as he crashed into the fleshy ground. He bit his lip hard to stop his own terrified yelp. They would hear him if he did. It was the first time All for One had put him in the hat in his more human form. It just made him a bigger target for the Nomus to possibly run into. A huff of air on his ankles let him know that a beast had in fact found him. He dragged himself away, utterly terrified. He was probably still human enough for them to see him as food. His back hit something solid and he almost lost control and screamed if it wasn't for a hand that clamped over his mouth. A sudden burst of light had the creature that had chased Izuku screeching and turning tail to run. Izuku shook. wondering what kind of monster held him that could have scared off that thing. "You're safe now. They wouldn't dare to bother me," said a soft voice above him as the hand receded away from his mouth, allowing him to pant from his running. Izuku scrambled back away from this new threat, turning to assess it. But this was not what he expected. A man stood before him with soft features. A light green ball of light hovered around him, magic tingling off of it. He was tall, thin, and with shoulder-length white hair that reminded Izuku of Tamura's if the teen had ever actually cared to take care of it. Green eyes blinked down at him in surprise. "A child," he said before his lips formed a grim line. "What has my brother done to you?" Izuku stared up at the glowing being, terrified. He was clearly a Fae too. Izuku was all but certain, his ears were a little too sharp, his skin too clear. Something about him felt more ethereal than anything. But what was he doing here? Was he a monster too? "Little one," the stranger asked, green eyes concerned as he reached out carefully once more. His voice seemed raspy, as if it had been a while since he'd spoken. "Do you know where you are? Why my brother took you?" His words finally registered for the child. "Why your brother?" That sharp, needle grin stretching facial scars flashed in his mind's eye. "All for one is your brother?" The man sighed, retracting his hand while his glow lessened some. There was a growl from nearby, and Izuku mindlessly scooted closer to the light, afraid to fall outside of its touch. "He is," the Fae acknowledged, looking forlorn. "Though I've only ever really known him as Hisashi." He regarded the smaller child, gaze growing sadder. "Child, you appear to be changing." Izuku swallowed, wondering how the other could tell. "Hisashi said I'm turning into a Fae, because of his magic." The younger looked down and away. "He's been using me as part of his act, for the circus." The weak light briefly blazed in response to the other's outrage. How? How can he keep disregarding our laws, all for the sake of his pursuit of power?" The stranger rose, pacing but making sure not to distance himself from the child he was protecting. "He's never learned, after all these years, still misusing his magic." Izuku watched him, somewhat warily. He was still hyper-aware of the danger that lurked around them. But the more this face spoke, the more questions seemed to be brought up. What laws did All for One break? If this was misusing magic, how were Fae meant to use it? Most importantly, if you're his brother, why are you in the hat too? The other paused in his muttering, looking perplexed. "Hat? You know," the green-haired child gestured. "At the void just beyond. This place where he hides the monsters, it's in his hat." The man snorted, looking up as if he could see the entrance with disdain. "That must be what form he keeps it in, now. But it's not a hat, it doesn't have a true form. It was created as the place that was meant to be his prison." The other glanced around, resigned. "It's meant to be a vault of sorts that only a few Fae could open and close. When he found a way free, he kept it, a trophy for his success, throwing the ones who jailed him into the portal instead." Izuku stood on shaky legs. Why didn't the Fae try to put him back in it? Seal it up once more? He's been hurting people, eating them. The faces of excited little children wanting to pet the bunny sprung in his mind's eye. "If your people have a way to stop him, they need to." The man's expression grew sick. He swallowed, looking away with haunted eyes. I can hear it from time to time, what goes on out there. I had hoped," he gritted his teeth, ducking so his hair helped hide his face. "I'm sorry, my people managed to cut him off from the realms, leaving him weakened. He's found this is one of the only ways to sustain his magic, to grow it. Even though he knows the dangers of dark magic, how it can twist you, destroying you from the inside out." Tamura's peeling skin came to mind, reminding the young one that all the Fae seemed to have some rotting hurting deformity in common. But this Fae, he didn't look anything like that. "So he once looked like you? All the Fae in the circus did?" The Fae appeared confused. "Only Fae who feed their magic through the dark arts would transform like they have. Now exclusively the darkest of our kind can stand to be within his presence. Fae always see through glamours, and he can do nothing to hide how monstrous he's become." At those words, the younger brother seemed to soften, contrite. "Hisashi, he was one of the strongest Fae to ever exist, once. I used to admire him so much, my brother was incredible. And he was more than happy to show off to me, he's always loved an audience to fawn over him." His eyes narrowed. "My people discovered that it wasn't a natural gift, though. I tried to confront him, but by then it was too late. He had learned to steal magic from other Fae, killing them or turning them mortal as he saw fit. He'd even stolen a few and turned them into," he looked out into the darkness, the gurgles and faint howls echoing around them, "into something other. Slaves that were his to control." Izuku glanced around, feeling unsettled. Those things out there had been Fae like this man? They'd once been normal, like him? He jerked back to attention as the stranger continued. "I knew he'd gone too far, that there was no way to come back from this. With my help, they managed to trick him, trapping him with the monsters he'd made for eternity. But he escaped, and my world had to protect itself by cutting off from yours, to keep him from getting back in. There's not a creature on this planet that doesn't fear him. He looked down, frowning as he became lost in his memories. I knew if we didn't act, the whole world would suffer, so I and 6 of the best warriors were tasked to subdue him once more. He sat down again, the light starting to dim. Of course my brother couldn't be tricked a second time. So we fought with everything we had, and he took us out, one by one. His eyes grew haunted once more. Shinomori, Banjo, N. He killed them just like that. Our youngest warrior, Nana, was stripped of her immortality before being thrown off a ledge. I had hoped she survived, somehow. But there was no way to check. My remaining friends tried to drag me away, back to the realm, but he caught us. And killed them in front of me just like the others. All my friends, gone. He looked down at his hands, the light practically extinguished. Left trapped here because of my brother's twisted sense of family. I might as well be dead, I've been alone so long. Part of Izuku felt frightened by the lack of light, the threat of the Nomu still lingering. But more than that, he felt the painful twist of sympathy. Fey or no, this man was just as much a prisoner of All for One as he was. Hesitantly, he reached out a hand, holding the larger, colder ones in his. He gave a weak smile as the light flickered in surprise. Why, you don't have to be alone anymore, not if I'm here. The Fey stayed frozen for a few moments, and Izuku worried he'd spoken out of turn. Who am I to comfort this stranger? I can't help him any more than he can help me. But to his relief, the being's light grew stronger, illuminating a genuine grin in return. I know it's wrong, but I'm grateful you found your way to me, if only so we can face this place together. His expression grew pensive, as if trying to solve something. Why did my brother send you down here? The boy cowered at Yoichi's question, his bunny ears flopping down, and his eyes darted nervously. Big brother, Yoichi thought, what have you done to this poor child? It wasn't my fault, Izuku whispered. He had turned me into a bunny and placed me in my cage, but then this stranger came in out of nowhere. A victim or another Fey? I'm not sure, Izuku said. He didn't seem completely human or Fey. But he seemed to know what was going on. He recognized me. The boy's voice hitched, and tears built in his eyes. He was going to take me back home to my mom. But All for One was coming, and he would have caught me. I know he would have. And then he and I would both be in trouble. So I escaped his grasp, and hid under the desk. Izuku shivered, curling into himself, his breath stuttering and voice shaking. All for One was so mad. So mad. He knew I wanted to escape. He told me I had one chance left, and I ruined it. I ruined my chance. The boy's brave facade cracked, and he wept loudly, his sobs shaking his whole body. Hey, kid. Izuku, it's okay. Don't cry. Yoichi scooched closer and hesitantly wrapped his arms around the boy. He didn't want Izuku to feel trapped or scared, but the cries were breaking his heart. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Izuku melted into his hold, his tears dripping down Yoichi's neck. He was tiny, Yoichi thought, pulling the boy closer. So small and so innocent, but brave and kind despite everything he had suffered. He pressed his face into Izuku's curls, the soft fur of his rabbit ears tickling his cheeks. The warmth of another person against him, the comfort of not being alone. I'm sorry you're in this position, he whispered, but thank you. It's been so long. So long since I've talked to another person? So long since I've been hugged? So long since I've not been alone? It was a glimmer of starlight on a black night. And yet, his brother had a way of destroying even the tiniest glimpse of light, as a giant, clawed hand stretched down out of the darkness and snapped around Izuku. The boy screamed, shrill and desperate, clawing at the grip. No! Don't let him take me. I don't want to go back. The boy thrashed in his brother's grip and clung with desperate fervor to Yoichi's hand. He's going to kill me. I don't want to die, please, I want to see my mom again. Yoichi's heart ached at the boy's fear. No child should have to suffer through this. I promise he won't kill you, Yoichi said. You'll survive. I'm here. You're not alone anymore. I will give you a gift, and my name Yoichi Shigaraki. He stretched as high as he could until his toes ached. The boy's hand was slipping through his own, fingers grasping but failing to hold on. But with a final jump, he pressed a kiss on the boy's hand before Izuku was yanked out of the darkness. The lingering magic of his kiss tingled on his lips as Yoichi was left in the darkness again. Please, big brother, he thought. Please let my blessing mean something. He flopped back on the spongy ground staring at the hole in the prison where Izuku had disappeared. It was odd that Hisashi had chosen to spare the boy. The Dark Fae had a strong disdain for humans, seeing them as a lower life form, nothing more than cattle to be driven and slaughtered. Fae didn't need human flesh to survive, but Hisashi had sought it out, created an entire glamour for snaring his prey. Yoichi had begged his brother to not seek out these dark forms of magic, but Hisashi had never listened. So for him to spare this boy was shocking. "I'll see you again," Yoichi promised himself. "And we'll come up with a plan to get you out of this nightmare." Izuku flopped onto the carpet of the Ringmaster's tent, violently shivering. All for One leaned over him, clothes splattered with blood and top hat in one hat. "It's time for your punishment, little bunny," the Ringmaster crooned dangerously. Izuku couldn't move. He was frozen to the spot, unable to look up at the face standing over him, unable to even breathe. He kept his eyes fixed on the ground, only to see patches of viscous, dark red liquid soaking into the dirt. His ears still in their rabbit form couldn't so much as twitch. All for One wasn't speaking, but Izuku couldn't be sure. All he could hear was the blood rushing in his long green ears as his heart pounded so fast and hard against his chest it was almost painful. He hated how much he resembled a terrified rabbit right at this moment. All for One stepped closer, and Izuku couldn't help but notice that his usually pristine shoes were still stained with blood. The monster crouched over him, and Izuku could already feel tears burning in his eyes. He never thought he'd live to see the day he would rather be back in the hat instead of out of it. At least he'd be with Yoichi in there. At least he'd be with someone who would do everything to protect him and wouldn't hurt him. Izuku had given up on hoping someone would help him here. Tamura wanted him to stay, All for One wanted him here. Anybody who figured out what the carnival really was would blame him for luring so many innocent people to their deaths. And they wouldn't be wrong. But that strange man Toshinori Yagi and Yoichi. They both were trying to help him. To protect him. To save him. They thought he was still worth saving. But they still couldn't protect him now. Familiar fingers ran through Izuku's hair, leaving traces of blood and flesh among Izuku's curls as All for One sighed in mock disappointment. "I just don't know what to do, little bunny," he crooned. "I thought we had moved past this. I've given you so many chances, far more than I've ever given anyone. So how do I make you understand that you are mine now?" The hand slowly moved from his hair and down to his face. Blood smeared Izuku's cheeks, only to be washed away by his tears. Deceptively gentle fingers gripped his chin, and he was forced to look up at All for One. Izuku couldn't hold back a whimper as the glamour faded away, revealing his captor as the monster he truly was. "You're not alone anymore." Izuku desperately hoped Yoichi was right. "It seems after your punishment, I'll have to keep you with me at all times," All for One mused. "You've proven that you are able to escape your cage now. Or perhaps I should have one made of iron so you won't be able to leave without hurting yourself." Izuku's eyes went wide at the suggestion. Already, he dreaded whenever he was brought out of the cage to be cuddled by All for One and Tamura. But to spend his entire time by All for One's side, never getting a moment free of his touch, free from his magic, free from these fingers that were now digging into his skin. The monster released his face, only to take him by his shoulder and pull him to his feet. "But first, your punishment, you naughty, little bunny." He turned towards the trunk that Izuku knew held the collar and leash, and Izuku could feel his fear rise to an all-time high. All for One never took him on walks, only Tamura. "You'll be happy to know that your little performance tonight was very successful," All for One said as he collected the familiar items. "The Nomu ate their fill and then some. So much so, that we even were able to spare a little morsel." He turned back to Izuku. All for One's teeth gleamed as he smiled down at Izuku like a pleased cat. Something was very, very wrong. Run. He had to run. He had to turn and fight or flight instincts took full control, and before Izuku could question if it was a good idea, he spun to the entrance of the tent. Now, where do you think you're going?" All for One chuckled, catching Izuku as he turned. Izuku screamed and thrashed against the Fey monster's hold. Claws as strong as steel held firm, while the other fastened the collar around his throat. No. With a tug on the leash, Izuku was pulled back to All for One, and the fingers returned to combing out his hair. "I think it's time you tasted the fruits of your labors, little bunny," All for One purred. "It's time you taste the flesh we feed on to survive." Izuku froze like a deer in headlights, his heart plunging to his stomach. He wanted him to eat. He could end it all here. He could tell All for One that Toshinori Yagi let him out of the cage and tried to rescue him. That he had been trying to be good, that he would continue to be his good little rabbit. And had he never met Yoichi in the hat, he might have done it. But something about the man's embrace, so kind and sincere compared to the possessive grips of Tamura and All for One, the way he had comforted him, the way he talked about his friends who went down fighting All for One because they knew it was the right thing to do. "You are not alone anymore." He could not do this. No. All for One paused, and it was the first time Izuku had ever seen the Fey surprised. "No," he repeated, voice dangerously dripping with warning. Izuku planted his feet, one of his hands clenched in a fist while the other, somehow still warm with Yoichi's kiss, went to his leash. "I won't do it. I don't care if you don't like it. I won't eat another human. I won't turn into a monster like you. All for One's smile became a snarl as he yanked Izuku closer, and his claws went into Izuku's shoulder. He could feel the blood starting to seep into where those claws grabbed him, but for once Izuku wasn't afraid of the pain. You seem to. His thought was cut off as he caught hold of Izuku's hand. With an expression of complete bewilderment, he bent down, inspecting a mark that Izuku hadn't seen before. A small, glowing white rune, similar to the ones Izuku had seen written on the papers All for One had on his desk. Still tingling with warmth, almost glittering in the light of the tent, exactly where Yoichi had kissed him. Little bunny, where did you get this mark? Izuku's mouth hung wordlessly open, unsure of what to say. He refused to get Yoichi in trouble, but it appeared that All for One didn't care about Izuku's non-answer, as All for One fell into his seat, dragging Izuku along with him. All for One's clawed fingers traced along the rune's curves, seeming in shock over its appearance. Quiet words fell from his mouth, humming as they flitted through the room. Walk freely and do not fear. The dark has no place in here. The breath of light, free from the night, shall guide your steps and gird your fight. 2 souls apart, 2 souls as one. If one for all, then they have one. The rune on Izuku's hand burned at the words, alighting something deep within his soul that had become shriveled and tired during his captivity. For the first time since he'd been taken, he felt joy bubble within his chest, and a giggle burst free. The oozing cuts in his shoulders knit back together, and the pain turned forgotten. Izuku gaped at the healing magic, straining against the collar to look closer. Yoichi, you idiot, All for One growled to himself. What have you done? Done what? Izuku asked, still feeling the euphoric high of the words and runes. Blessed you. Tied his soul to yours and imbued you with light magic, thus stalling your transformation into a fallen fae and linking his fate to yours. Hisashi laced his claws through his bunny's fur. The tiny form of the rabbit sat on the desk in front of him, unconsciously clicking his teeth in his sleep as the fallen fae regarded him. He had put the child to sleep. He needed a moment to think about this new development. His little brother couldn't seem to stop himself from making Hisashi's life difficult. The rune had been proof of that. Now with that tying Izuku's soul to his brother's, Hisashi couldn't continue with his initial plan to make the boy into an adorable fallen fae to join his circus. If he tried, with the light magic in the rabbit, it would very likely tear the boy apart. And his brother now, since they had twisted their fates together. With the light infecting the child, Izuku would have to choose to fall himself. Hisashi couldn't force the transformation as he had been subtly doing since he had come to possess the boy. He let a claw slide along one of the rabbit's ears as he thought. Izuku had reminded him of his brother when he had first seen the boy. Those green eyes were a marker of such a similar soul. Perhaps he had been hoping to get a different ending than the one he had gotten with his brother by snatching the child up. Maybe he had thought he'd get someone to keep beside him as the perfect little helper he had always wished his brother was. Alas, it was his own underestimation of his brother that had let this soul slip through his fingers. But maybe, this development was something he could work with. If Izuku fell willingly to darkness, then he would taint Yoichi's magic and drag Yoichi down with him. It all depended upon Izuku. Hisashi would need to be exceptionally careful now. With the light within Izuku and a soul that echoed his brother's, it would not be easy. But this was his chance. All was not lost. But now this was a wager. To gain both his brother and a son? With this fusion of magic and fate, it was hard to figure out what Izuku would become to him. Hisashi had been making him into a fae, so technically he was a master. But with his brother's share of magic and soul in the mix, it now made them related by fae rules. His eyeless gaze continued to stare at the dozing rabbit. One he had considered more like a favorite pet. But now his brother had made him so much more. So now was his second chance to rewrite his failure to corrupt his brother. The question was, how would he get the boy to fall? Izuku woke up, for the first time ever, in his mostly human form. The Ringmaster had never let him stay human after he fell asleep. He sat up, feeling extra confused and tired. Looking around, he let out a tiny squeak of fear when he realized that he was in All for One's bed. Did that mean he had slept next to the monsters all night? Izuku rubbed his eyes and tried to remember. He remembered everything up until All for One had found the rune on his hand. He quickly checked to see if it was still there. Thankfully it was, but it wasn't glowing like when All for One had touched it yesterday. Izuku rubbed his hand and looked around again to make sure he was alone. Had All for One really just left him here in his human form? Was this a trap, to try and catch him making another escape attempt? Izuku shivered and reached up to touch his bunny ears. It was a strange sensation, one he wasn't able to do much. Normally, when he was human, it was because he was being cuddled by Tamura or All for One, or because he was performing. He wasn't usually able to touch his ears while alone. They were green like his hair and he could pull them all the way down without hurting them. Most of the time he had them pressed down against his neck because he was scared, or because he was being petted. As Izuku was exploring his ears, trying to get accustomed to using them better, the tent door opened. He squeaked and slid back when All For One entered and walked straight towards him. He was wearing his glamour, which made Izuku's heart start racing. Was it time for a show? He didn't want to perform again. Izuku grabbed a pillow and held it between them when All For One sat down next to him on the bed. "Good morning, Izuku." The Fae smiled, reaching out to pet Izuku's head. "How are you feeling?" Izuku hugged the pillow tighter and slid back, trying to get as close to the tent wall as he could. This was strange. The glamour was hurting his eyes. It was too bright and friendly, especially knowing what lay beneath it. Was All For One trying not to frighten him? It wasn't working. "I'm sure you're hungry after sleeping for so many days." All For One chuckled at the way Izuku's ears pricked. "Your transformation has been taking some big steps. It's normal for you to be so sleepy. Am I going to turn into something like you?" Izuku asked with a warble of fear in his voice. "You're going to be like my brother." All For One corrected him. "We have to get you there before we can continue." "Continue what?" Izuku squeaked. "What are you going to do to me?" All For One took Izuku's hand and looked at the rune again, rubbing his finger over it. It didn't glow this time, just sat peacefully in Izuku's skin. After staring at it for a few minutes, he dropped the hand and scooped Izuku into his arms. "Let's get you some breakfast, bunny." Izuku stayed stiff in his arms, even when the Fae kissed his cheek. Something was wrong. This wasn't normal. What was All For One planning to do to him? Was he going to try and make him eat human meat? There was no way he would let that happen. Fortunately, All For One sat down in front of a large bowl of the same Fae fruits that Tamura had brought him. He kept Izuku on his lap and pulled the bowl closer. "Here you go, little one. Eat up." "I can't eat that much." Izuku squeaked. All For One chuckled. "You may find your appetite larger than you remember. Your body needs the extra energy and magic to keep growing and changing properly." "But I don't want to change." All For One chuckled again and kissed the top of his head. "If you don't eat, you'll die. You're already too far along to reverse it. This is the only food that you can eat, baby." Izuku swallowed hard. Was it really too late? Perhaps All For One had sped things up while he was asleep. "What happens after I finish changing?" He was almost too scared to hear the answer. "After that?" All For One repeated. He took one of the fruits and placed it in Izuku's hands. Izuku's stomach growled and his mouth watered. "You just need to be good and make the right choice. Don't worry, I'll be here to help you. Now eat up, bunny." Izuku couldn't resist any longer and took a big bite out of the sweet fruit. He didn't want to die, and his body craved the fruits his captor was giving him. Large tears swelled up in his eyes as he devoured them. He didn't want to be like the other Fae. He didn't want to be consumed by dark magic. Izuku jumped when he felt All For One slip something around his neck. The collar and leash. "Ah, you're still in trouble, little one." The Fae smiled when Izuku turned to look at him. "I'll think of a new punishment, since you aren't ready for meat yet. In the meantime, you get to stay with me." Izuku shivered and tried not to choke. The tears slid out of his eyes and onto his juicy cheeks. He wanted to go back to Yoichi. Yoichi could explain all of this. But, based on the way he was cuddling him, All For One didn't seem to have any intention of putting him back in the hat. Izuku looked away from him and tried to eat slower. He really needed to find a way to escape. At first, Izuku had been completely terrified of the notion of becoming anything like the Ringmaster. The Fae had already been changing him, something he had done his best to not think about even as he was paraded around as a rabbit. But now he could definitely feel himself changing. Something internally that felt undefinable and something that was, for once, something. The Ringmaster seemed to be unable to manipulate. If anything, the Ringmaster seemed reluctant to do much magic on Izuku. He seemed content to watch and nurture the strangeness that was growing in Izuku. The only time he became a rabbit was for shows, and surprisingly, that became very infrequent. The rabbit ears unfortunately felt like a permanent fixture. Although Izuku wasn't sure if that was the Ringmaster's doing or a side effect from having been put in that form for so long. Now, Izuku spent a lot of his time tucked away in the Ringmaster's tent. Left alone with a basket of the Fae fruit and strict orders to rest and eat. Even if it appeared like Izuku was alone, he had slowly become more aware of his surroundings. Although he didn't see or hear anyone in the tent, he felt eyes on him. Familiar and terrifying eyes. Those he knew from his time in the Ringmaster's hat. The sickly distorted creatures. Like having a new sense, Izuku felt queasy around them. And he was certain that somewhere, somehow, one was in the tent with him. He had felt them in the tent not long after the Ringmaster had stopped taking him out to performances. No doubt intending it to be a sort of prison guard to make sure Izuku didn't leave. "You're getting distracted." Focus, Yoichi said. His ghostly outline hovered just over Izuku's shoulder. Izuku jerked his head back to the papers in front of him, trying to figure out the runes strewn across the pages. Sorry. Izuku mumbled lowly, careful to basically whisper in case the creature could hear him. It's alright. You're probably instinctively on edge around my brother's creations. And young fairies tend to be too curious. Honestly, I'm surprised I'm able to retain your attention. Izuku's cheeks burned. It was the third time Yoichi had brought his focus back to the paper. If it got any worse, then this might be a lost cause. The younger Fey brother had become a near constant presence when the Ringmaster wasn't around. Izuku had thought he had finally lost his mind to the madness when he started hearing the voice. But the Fey had assured him that it was because their souls were now bound, allowing them to communicate like this. Even if Izuku was going crazy, the voice was giving him the only plan of action that he could get. And that was to learn as much magic as possible. Starting with the Fey runic language. The second to last cluster. That's a good one to try. It's a word close to bind. Might be useful in the future against my brother. Izuku squinted down at the neat script. The fairy language was pretty to look at but basically indecipherable to him. But Yoichi had assured him it would become intuitive over time. Trying to commit the word to memory, he turned and went over to a corner of the tent. The dirt ground provided an easy way to practice writing. He could wipe away the evidence. We are lucky that he has given you time alone. We need to take advantage of it. Why has he left me in here? He won't stop touching me when he is here, but he never really takes me outside anymore, Izuku muttered as he traced over a curvy letter, brow furrowing as he tried to commit the letter to memory. He didn't dare take the papers off the Ringmaster's desk, fearful that it would somehow give him away. Fey are secretive creatures by nature. My brother more so with his possessive traits. He is likely hiding you away from humans as he is coming to view you as a youngling. I'm not a fairy, Izuku whispered. Yoichi didn't say anything to that. Despite the changes that were happening to him, Izuku wasn't ready to give up his humanity. One of the first things he had asked Yoichi was if there was a way to turn him back to being a human. Yoichi didn't have the heart to tell Izuku that he had in fact met Izuku to this fate by giving him the soul bond. If he hadn't done it, Izuku would have remained a soul to be tortured by his brother until he really was nothing but a mindless rabbit. Yoichi instead danced around it, saying he wasn't sure. Izuku had clung to the answer. Let hope motivate him. Yoichi wasn't sure what the boy would do if he realized he would never be able to return home. You're making a mistake. Go back and check over the letters. Izuku sighed in frustration. He couldn't focus. Try as hard as he might, any new thought that popped into his head seemed to steal his focus. Whimsical and impulsive like the reputation of Fey in fairy tales. He wiped his hand across the dirt and went back to the desk once again looking over the letters. Will I really be able to use this against him? Izuku asked, barely audibly. With enough practice you could learn a few helpful things. We just have to wait for you to grow into your magic. There was absolutely no way that the barely newborn Fey was going to beat his 100-year-old fallen Fey brother. But there had to be a way. Teaching Izuku some little things would help prepare him for when Yoichi eventually figured out a way to deal with his brother. Looking over Hisashi's notes was definitely letting him see just how powerful and abysmal his brother was. At least Izuku didn't have to read these abominable spells and accounts. Not yet at least. And hopefully never. I hope we can start practicing soon. I'm tired of feeling powerless. Izuku said, rubbing at his eyes. His energy was waning. Unsurprising as naps tended to be needed in chaotic frequency. Izuku. Hold on. I think I figured out this last letter. I'll practice it one more time and then I think I'm going to pass out, Izuku grumbled, blinking hard to stay awake. Izuku. Izuku's rabbit ears perked and his attention latched onto Yoichi's urging tone. He fearfully looked toward the tent entrance. Heart racing thinking that the Ringmaster had caught him. But as he had sensed, the Ringmaster wasn't here. So what was Yoichi scared of? The mirror, Yoichi urged. Izuku looked back to the mirror that sat on the desk. A simple one that the Ringmaster tended to use. To check glamours or show Izuku how he looked. Izuku stared at himself in the reflection. A tired-looking boy with strange bunny ears. The rune on his hand glowed lightly, showing Yoichi's current connection to him. Nothing seemed out of place. And that was why it was frightening when Yoichi had sounded disturbed. Do not turn around. Izuku stopped focusing on himself in the mirror and started looking at the background. The comfy bed, abandoned rabbit cage. A large bookshelf and a few trunks that Izuku wasn't allowed in. Again he wasn't sure what Yoichi was trying to point out. The wall. Above the bed. Slowly Izuku's eyes were drawn to the space and he froze. Because with his back turned he could finally see where the monster he had been in the constant presence of was. A single eye sat open, staring blankly at the inside of the tent. Not through a hole in the tent wall, but from the wall itself. And the more Izuku looked, the more he saw them. Many eyes. Hidden all along the walls where Izuku had his back to it. Izuku slowly got up and went to his dirt corner, casting a side glance to the wall and noticed the way the eyes closed and disappeared. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as he felt the gazes return to his back. No doubt now located near the mirror to continue watching his back. He shakily sat in the dirt corner, but instead of testing his writing he stared at the tent wall. It wasn't made of canvas. Panic seized Izuku. It had been dyed and was dried like leather. But it was undoubtedly skin. Izuku! Yoichi called, but Izuku couldn't respond. He was scrambling away from the corner, feeling 1,000 eyes following him and watching his every move. He couldn't back any closer to the walls of the tent, because he was afraid of what he would see. Was this human skin? Was this what they did to the remains of their meals? Preserved the skin and made it into tents? Did those eyes belong to the children who'd tried to pet him as a rabbit? Or was the tent some fey being like the Ringmaster, that wanted to devour him just as much as everything else had when he was first trapped here as a bunny? He could hear Yoichi begging him to calm down, but Izuku couldn't think about calming down. He was terrified and adrenaline was rushing through him, urging his body to move before any clear thought could form. Instead he turned and rushed out of the monstrosity and into the evening twilight. Instantly, he was spotted by the knife thrower and the fire eater, and his large ears twitched in fear. "Ah, there's the cute bunny," Toga cooed. "What are you doing out?" Izuku didn't bother to wait for her to finish. He turned on his heel and sprinted around between the different tents and attractions of the seemingly innocent circus. But now that he knew what the tent was, he could see it in the other tents. The eyes that closed just as he came close, wind chimes and ornaments out of polished white wood that he now recognized was not wood but bone. Even the glittering decorations on some of the tents looked more like trinkets of rings, earrings, and necklaces that had once belonged to people but now had become the houses of the creatures that trapped him. No wonder All for One knew he had tried to escape when he was with Tamura. He had probably known where Izuku was the entire time, with the eyes watching him. Which meant he also knew where Izuku was right now. The thought spurred Izuku onward, dodging through the other performers, around the acts and tents, looking for some sort of sign that he was close to an exit. Any sort of exit. Something. He gasped when he was pulled out of the ground by his large, fuzzy green ears, and dangled a foot off the ground, his legs kicking and flailing as he shouted in shock. "Such a quick little bunny you have become." All for One chuckled, his other arm scooping Izuku under the legs so he was cradled against the creature's gigantic chest. "But I do not recall giving you permission to leave your tent." Clawed hands began stroking his hair, and Izuku found himself frozen in the Ringmaster's arms as All for One turned to bring him back into the midst of the circus. But unlike before, the claws had no underlying threat, scraping along his scalp and threatening to make him bleed if he so much as twitched away. Instead they were almost tender, as if All for One was doing his best not to harm him in any way. "Did you just miss me, my little youngling?" the Ringmaster asked. "I am sorry I neglected to see you so much today. But now we can spend the rest of our evening playing together." Izuku whimpered at what that could mean. Did he intend to keep Izuku on his lap and cuddle him again? Or make him eat more of the fruit that would make him more and more like him and Tamura and Yoichi until he would begin to want to eat meat like the Ringmaster originally planned? Or was he going to tuck Izuku in bed, and dote on him like a child, as he had the past several nights? Before he could think on it further, he realized that they were back at the tent. Instantly he began to thrash in All for One's grip, trying to twist and run. But the ethereal being held tightly, his eyes wide with surprise at Izuku's determination to run. Where had this attitude come from? His little changeling had been acting so well behaved lately, ever since he received the bond. "Don't take me back in there," Izuku begged. It's skin." The Ringmaster hesitated, taken aback by this objection, and then his mouth twisted into a toothy smile. The teeth were still in points, and Izuku thought he could see little stains of blood on them still. "Well, of course, bunny," he said as if the answer was obvious. "Trees and flowers don't have legs. It is not like they could get up and move with us when we travel. This is our best way to travel. And it allows me to keep an eye out for runaway little bunnies." His fingers poked Izuku's belly at that, in what was clearly meant to be an attempt to tickle him. But Izuku only shrieked and tried harder to wiggle free. "Stop!" Izuku shouted. "I don't want to go in there. I don't want to eat your food. I don't want you to change me. I don't want to be like you. I want my mom. I want to leave. I want to go home." "Silly youngling, this is home," All for One cooed, carrying him into the tent. Izuku sobbed as he was sat down on the desk like a child, the feeling of hundreds of eyes now on him. He tried to scramble off the desk, only to feel the velvet collar around his throat once more. He shouted and tried to tug away in frustration while All for One hummed and rummaged through the trunk by the wall made of skin. I don't want to be a fairy. Izuku yelled. I'm not going to be your bunny or your youngling. I'm going to escape. He was cut off when All for One cheerfully popped another fruit in his mouth and ruffled his curls. Such a cute little bunny, he laughed. But perhaps you are still having trouble getting used to the idea of being part of the family. I had not considered this before when you were simply my little pet, but now I realize you should be dressed as one of us. Izuku tried to spit out the fruit, but his body involuntarily chewed and swallowed, craving the sweetness of the fey fruit. All for One placed garments beside him on the desk, and with a snap of his fingers, the flaps of the tent closed behind them. Arms up, bunny, All for One ordered. You are going to look adorable dressed like this. It took several minutes of struggling, squirming, pets, coaxing, yelling and force-feeding of fey fruit, but Izuku was eventually stuffed into a shirt and tight pants that looked like they were sewn from leaves and flower petals. He had a pair of heeled black leather boots over his feet and a long red, tailed overcoat. All for One had painted his nose and mouth to look like a rabbit nose and whiskers, and even painted his cheeks pink and added a painted smile. The collar and leash remained, as All for One somehow pulled out a pair of realistic wings that he pinned to Izuku's back. They were heavy, large, and bulky. Yours won't grow in for quite a while, he explained cheerfully. But these will help you get used to the weight and feeling. He held his fingers above Izuku in a rubbing motion, and immediately gold and silver glittering dust sprinkled down from his fingers, covering every inch of Izuku's clothes, hair, and skin. All for One hummed in satisfaction and stood Izuku on his feet, leading him to the mirror. What do you think, bunny? Oh, wait. I almost forgot the finishing touch. From thin air he made a top hat, identical to his except it was green instead of black. He set it down on Izuku's hair, right between his ears. There we are, youngling, he cooed, kissing Izuku on the cheek. Now you see? You truly are one of us, Izuku. All for One stared proudly at Izuku, all dressed up and looking like a proper fae for his circus. His transformation must be getting close to the halfway point of completion if his bunny could see the truth behind the tents. When he first realized Izuku was running again, he was quite frustrated. Not at Izuku really, but at the fact that all his minions were looking and chasing after his son. Luckily none of the lower-class Dark Fae were able to touch him. His bunny was much too dexterous for that. These past few weeks after Yoichi had created the soul bond, All for One had carefully been setting up a plan for Izuku to slowly fall to corruption. It was rather simple really. Izuku just needed to willingly use some basic gray area spells, before willingly eating some pixie fruit soaked in blood. That would start Izuku's transition into a fallen fae. Then, once Izuku had begun to fall, his brother would follow soon after. Honestly, it shouldn't be hard to trick Izuku into the corruptions of dark fae. Fae children possessed notoriously fickle minds, easy to mold and distract. The hardest part would be dealing with the soul bond. He knew his brother had been speaking to the youngling. He had seen through the eyes of the tent that Yoichi was trying to teach Izuku some of the magical characters that fae used for spells. So, while it shouldn't normally be difficult to convince his son to dabble in the darker side of magic, Yoichi could prove an obstacle. He could probably force a few of his Nomo to distract the foolish fae while he gave Izuku a few of the doctored pixie fruits and taught him a few spells. They wouldn't hurt him of course, just keep him busy so All for One could have some quality time with his youngling. Or, if push came to shove, he might have to remove Yoichi from the vault for a few hours. His little brother would be distracted by his circus and unable to creep silently like a ghost around the youngling in that case. He should prepare some of his main performers on how to keep his little brother in check. Even with Yoichi weakened by his years in the hat, he could be incredibly crafty. All for One always liked to be prepared. Yes, the more All for One thought about it, the more he liked this plan. He would finally be able to hear his brother's voice again. Together with his new son, they would be a complete family. Besides, it would be even more fun to watch Yoichi turn into a fallen fae if All for One got to see the look of horror on his brother's face the whole time. Izuku naturally felt suspicious when All for One offered to teach him magic. Well, offered might not be the right word. All for One had dragged him into his quarters, thrown him into a chair, and handed him a crystal ball. You'll like this lesson, the fae promised with an overly toothy grin. I'm going to teach you how to repel the Nomu. They'll never dare torment you again. You'll become their superior and their master. Izuku did not trust that grin. Are you summoning the Nomu here? He tried not to let his voice tremble. Close. All for One said cheerfully. Clever bunny. He tweaked Izuku's nose. Then, his fingers flashed over the ball, drawing a symbol. The air filled with a heavy scent, sickly sweet, like flowers but with an undertone of decay. Dark shadows started to crawl out of the crystal ball. Izuku shuddered, trying to drop the ball, but they wrapped around his arms and held him in place. Bending down, All for One whispered, "To stop the shadows, you only need to seize control of them. A member of my family should be able to use such power easily. Exert your magic." Izuku stammered, "That's dark magic." Yoichi had warned him against practicing any dark magic. It would cause Izuku to fall into a dark fae, and it might even drag Yoichi down with him due to their bond. All for One faked an exaggerated shocked expression. "More like gray magic, bunny. Besides, you don't really have a choice." The shadows bit deep into Izuku's arms. He screamed. Darkness covered Izuku's eyes. He saw flashes of horrors and memories. That first painful transformation into a rabbit, the sensation of his bones cracking as his body shrank. The darkness inside the hat. Tamura's rough grip. Izuku couldn't give in. He would doom not only himself, but also Yoichi, who had trusted him and tried to save him. Tears dripped down his cheeks, but he did not reach for the shadows. All for One leaned close and murmured into his ear, "It only gets worse." A vision of Inko flashed across Izuku's eyes. She lay withered and dying in her bed, begging to see him one last time. He screamed. This was unbearable to see. Nearly, Izuku reached for the shadows, but he stopped himself just in time. If this continued, he'd lose his mind and give in. Izuku only saw one other way to make it stop. He had to trick All for One into thinking he'd use dark magic to control the shadows. Straightening, Izuku said, "That was easy." Tears lurked at the back of his voice, but he did not shed them. He stared straight forward as if he couldn't see his mother dying out of the corner of his eye. Not the slightest did he give a hint of her ghost's presence. All for One chuckled and brushed back Izuku's bangs from under his top hat. "Good bunny. See? The magic feels good the more you use it." Izuku nodded frantically, desperately hoping that All for One would take away the crystal ball and end his pain before his lie got exposed. Instead, All for One pulled off his hat and held it out as if to perform a trick. Izuku nearly screamed in despair. But he kept it tight inside. Narrowly, he clung to his sanity and his act. Everything was going according to All for One's plan. Izuku had used his first dark magic, and no harm had been done. All for One didn't count any harm to his bunny that didn't leave physical marks. A bit of fear was good for children, it made them angry and more vicious. Now that Izuku was tainted by dark magic, All for One could safely remove Yoichi from the hat. Yoichi would be unable to use any light magic while someone he was soul bonded to used dark magic. In essence, Yoichi would be totally helpless. How delightful. Perhaps All for One would turn his little brother into a white dove. After shuffling Yoichi off into a bird cage, All for One would have all the time in the world to focus on corrupting his bunny without interference. All for One plunged his hand into the hat and reached for his brother. It would be good to see Yoichi again. It would be even better to win against Yoichi for once and for all. Yoichi startled when he felt invisible hands wrap around him. His brother had come into contact for the first time in years. In that contact lay an opportunity. Perhaps the only one he would ever have. Yoichi reached out to Izuku through their bond, drawing on the younger Fae's bright and shining light magic. If only Yoichi could break free of this painful grasp, then he could turn the tables and drag his brother into the hat. Everything depended on Izuku's willpower, now. Tears streamed down Izuku's cheeks as the shadows bit deeper into his wrists. Fortunately, All for One was looking down at his hat and couldn't see. The shadows ate into his ears, calling him a weakling, a failure, a terrible son. Still, Izuku grimly hung on. Izuku felt it when Yoichi reached out for his strength. "Please, I need you," Yoichi whispered, his voice barely distinguishable among the shadows. "This is our only chance to stop my brother. I don't know why he made such a mistake as leaving himself vulnerable to me without tainting you first. But I might be able to shove him back into his rightful prison where he belongs." For that promise, Izuku would endure any pain. He summoned up all his rage at being called a bunny and manhandled and stolen from his home. Then he poured every last bit of his power into Yoichi. All for One cried out as his arm yanked deeper into the hat. For a brief moment, he looked comically surprised. Then his entire body was sucked into his own hat. The air seemed to scream. The tent was ripped into the hat as well. Colors swirled around Izuku, dizzying and fast, making his stomach turn. He heard distant screams that sounded like the other circus members. Then, with one last scent of decay, the entire circus was sucked into the hat. Izuku sat on a single wooden chair, alone in a field of dead grass. With a pop in the air, Yoichi tumbled out of the hat. He ran over to Izuku, crying, "You did it." With one hand, Yoichi wrenched away the crystal ball. Izuku shuddered in relief as the shadows and the voices left him. "Is it over? All for One is gone." Yoichi hugged Izuku, patting his back. "It's over. My brother has been trapped in his prison, as he deserves. Someone has to pull out what's inside the hat, he can't do it himself. He can't hurt you any longer. Izuku wept, from relief and because of everything he'd lost. He ripped off the top hat and the fake wings. Yoichi helped him remove his collar. Izuku stomped on it for good measure. Freedom did not feel entirely real to Izuku until he felt the first rays of the sun on his face. Together, Izuku and Yoichi stood with their arms around each other and watched the sun rise over the field where the circus had once been. When the shock wore off, Izuku realized he had no idea where he might be. He didn't even know if he was still in Japan. He and Yoichi went to the road and stood with their thumbs up, hoping to hitchhike. Or even just to find someone who could give them a location. Izuku desperately needed to see his mother again. He couldn't imagine what grief she must be going through. How long had he been gone? It felt like months. Turning to Yoichi, Izuku asked, "Do you think I can become human again before I see my mother? I don't want to shock her too much, never mind, it's more important for me to see her right away." Yoichi paled. "Izuku, the transformation was irreversible. Even before I bonded us together, the touch of magic upon you would have been permanent. After our bond, you'll forever be a fae. I'm sorry. The circumstances were desperate, but even so, I should have talked to you before first. We didn't exactly have time to talk. We're only free because of what you did." Deep down, Izuku had suspected it might be like that. Hence the reason why he'd immediately taken back his question after asking Yoichi. He hadn't been ready to acknowledge it, but now he heard it spoken out loud, he realized he'd already known the truth. His misadventure had permanently changed him, both inside and out. Though Izuku could have gotten angry, he felt too tired, and Yoichi looked so sad. Izuku had no anger left inside of him. No anger left for someone who had been a prisoner even longer than him, no anger left for the circus members who he pitied and even felt irrationally guilty for destroying, not even any anger left at all for one himself. He was merely tired and wanted to go home. "I forgive you. I know my mother will accept me no matter what I look like." Yoichi turned even paler. "How long were you with the circus?" "I lost track of time," Izuku admitted. "Things got blurry, especially in the hat. But it seemed like a week or two. Maybe a month at most." Yoichi wrung his hands. "Maybe you should sit down before I tell you this." "But there's nowhere to sit." Izuku looked around the barren field. "Do I hear a car motor?" A red, yellow, and blue truck pulled over. The door opened. Izuku gaped to see a very familiar face. "Mr. Yagi?" Toshinori Yagi asked urgently, "Is the circus here?" His gaze fastened on Yoichi. "Who is this?" Yoichi said, "The circus is gone. We defeated all for one. Mostly thanks to Izuku here." He put an arm around Izuku's shoulders. Toshinori's worried face melted into a smile. "I'm glad. The nightmare is finally over." Urgently, Izuku asked, "Where are we?" "I need to find Muzurifu. That's where my mother lives." The smile dropped off Toshinori's face. "I know where your mother is. I found her putting up missing posters for you." "But..." Izuku could not understand why Toshinori looked so sad, but it made him afraid. Izuku knocked on the door. Despite Yoichi and Toshinori behind him, he felt tense and afraid. Inko Midoriya opened the door. She looked at least 2 decades older by the wrinkles in her face and the gray in her hair. Izuku flinched. Toshinori had warned him about time passing differently in the circus, but it was another thing to see it. Izuku said, "Mom, it's me." "Who are you?" Inko asked blankly. "I'm not interested in buying anything." Toshinori had also warned that Inko had lost her memories over time, but Izuku could not have believed it without seeing it. Tears filled his eyes. He'd made it home, but lost the reason he needed to be home. "I'm sorry to bother you." He turned away. "Wait," Inko called. Izuku turned back around. His mother wept, her hands coming up to her mouth. "Izuku? My Izuku? How could I have forgotten you?" Mother and son fell into each other's arms and held each other, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Mom. I never should have begged you to take me to the circus." Izuku cried. "I'm sorry. I can't believe I forgot you. I never should have stopped looking." Inko cried even harder. "It was really painful. But I'm back now. Thank you for coming back home to me." The two of them finally stumbled into the living room and collapsed on the sofa. They went through a whole box of tissues crying and blowing their noses. Only then did Inko finally ask, "What happened?" Her fingers traced the tips of Izuku's pointed ears. Izuku swallowed hard. "I was kidnapped by a dark fae. We defeated him, but he transformed me. I'm a fae now. Yoichi says I can't stay here." From the doorway, Yoichi quietly said, "The air in the human world isn't healthy for young fae if they stay here permanently, only in smaller doses. And Izuku can't eat the food here any longer, only fae food. I'm sorry. I need to take him to the fae realm, but I promise I will bring him back to visit you frequently. At least you brought back my son. That's more than I dared hope for. Inko's eyes went to Toshinori. I know you. The memories are starting to come back. Toshinori inclined his head. I encountered you a couple times while you were looking for your son. The circus touched me as well. I've been sick and I haven't aged ever since. I'm something between a fae and a human. Yoichi says that if I go to the fae realm with him, my condition will improve. I promise to help him look after young Izuku. Inko nodded. Thank you both for looking after Izuku. It comforts me to think that he will have someone when I'm gone. Don't say that, Mom. Izuku cried passionately. This got him sobbing again. He knew what she meant. Inko had grown older, and Izuku's aging had slowed, so she would be unlikely to see him make it to adulthood. But he did not want to think about that yet. He could not bear to think about losing his mother when he just found her again. Inko stroked his hair. I plan to live a good long time. I'll learn how to cook fae food for you if you bring me ingredients. Please return as often as you can. The two of them held each other, both scarred by their experiences, but together again. In the happiness of the reunion, no one noticed that sometime during their journey, the hat containing All for One had vanished.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.